Do I count as
I was
a
going to
quorum
say,
if
that's
I'm-
so interesting. Yeah. While we're live, will you get Allison? So we are live in Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. It's Friday, January 26th. And in the witness chair, we have a member of our committee, Senator Harrison. I will say, as we get started, that between this week and next week, we are still taking any proposals for the home bill. And then that is the deadline. We will then consider those proposals and move forward with a bill by February 9th. So, of course, we want members of the committee to be able to bring their ideas forward. And my attempt at some kind of consensus is that if 3 members of the committee, feel positively enough about the idea to move it forward, then we would include it for further consideration in the final bill. So with that all said, Senator Harrison, you have until 9:30.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So for the record, I'm Wendy Harrison. I'm the Windham District Representative to the Senate. And I appreciate this time. What I'm going to do is relatively quickly go through bills, most of which have been introduced separately for potential inclusion in our home bill. So the first one I wanted to talk about is the Stormwater Utilities Bill. That's S-243. That was presented to the Government Operations Committee, and it may be in their bill, but as you know, I've mentioned stormwater utilities many times in our conversations about flood resiliency. And I'll just briefly summarize and then see if anyone has questions. Stormwater utilities are a mechanism that exists now. It's not clear in the statutes. This bill clarifies the statutes, makes it clear that the use of revenue can be for stormwater control and flood management. It also authorizes stormwater rates to be based on an equivalent residential unit, which is the typical way that stormwater utilities are established. And it establishes a grant program to support joint municipal stormwater operations. And now it doesn't suggest or require that multiple municipalities share in a stormwater utility, but it does encourage municipalities to share a consultant who would establish the utility or who would manage the utility, because it's very technical. And a lot of small towns have challenges doing this. So we talked about this a little bit when we had the
and you presented this in
town of Jamaica town administrator. Yes, and I did present it, and I just really hope that it can be included here too, because it's just a really important mechanism. Okay.
Who have you talked to about this that's kind of named in the bill? ANR?
DEC I spoke with when but I don't have names with me, but I can get that to you, Madam Chair. And obviously Ledge Council. So it was Tucker Anderson.
Okay.
Is the Ledge Council.
So Tucker's the drafter. Okay.
Yes. And I spoke with the 2 individuals, one from in Chittenden County, where most of them exist. The Public Works Director in South Burlington and the previous manager in St. Albans. And there was a situation in St. Albans a year or so ago regarding stormwater utilities and agriculture. This bill does not change the situation. This bill does not address that. This depends on if you want it fixed or not want it fixed. So I'm not going to have an opinion on that.
The town city issue?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, and it's ag, basically. I mean, my understanding is, I mean, I can go into detail if you want.
But we hear a lot of finance.
Right, but this does not change the existing situation. This clarifies and makes the statute much more clear. And it provides specific ways that the towns can share the revenue. just one more point. Stormwater includes things that could be financed by a stormwater utility would be ditches, culverts, any sort of drainage improvements that you have, not just the installation of them, but the maintenance of them. So typically half of a town budget is the highway budget. This bill could, or this source of income could handle almost half of that in many towns.
Okay.
So towns really need other sources of
Right.
revenue, and it's a good source of revenue because you can reduce what you pay if you reduce your impact on the system.
Mhm.
That's why it's a utility. It's because it's based on the property's impact on the system.
Mhm.
So far, I haven't heard any opposition, but
Okay.
you never know, people.
Any questions? Any other questions? Senator Clarkson, for you?
No, I thought this is in GovOps.
Yes,
This was
Oh,
sent to
okay.
GovOps. So
Okay.
we've had it presented to us already.
Okay.
but I just want to make sure it happens.
So
Now, I'm
you,
signed on to it. so,
right,
you know,
I am too. So
The
is-
only thing that just keeps coming to mind, in the back of my mind, is we have all these various agreements, all of which are different between, stormwater, we've got it regarding, the CUD problem.
Right.
And we got 15 different regional governing
Mhm.
arrangements, and it gets very confusing.
Our town manager in Shelburne says, can we have like an Act 46 for municipalities?
To have county government.
So,
Oh,
Yeah.
so we
Please.
have a county government bill in Senate GovOps. Because, for a whole host of reasons, we are looking at regionalization. We've been looking for a long time on regionalization
Law
of public
enforcement,
safety.
there are lots of communications, there are lots of issues.
And FEMA money, I mean, we lost out on a lot of COVID money because we didn't have county government.
So Senator Clarkson, do you think government operations is,
Yes, I think that's probably
Taking
the
it
best place. We need two places. We're in more than one place, so we're able to do.
it can be, I think this would mean a stop for our whole bill in government operations that might not have
Right.
existed before. So
I would.
I'm not
chat with
ruling it
Ruth and see
out,
what-
but yeah, could we see if government operations wants to take it up?
Yes, certainly.
Now we
I'll
don't-
just need to keep track of it, but can I
Yeah.
just address the county issue? And I have concerns about that too.
Yeah, I'd save them for Senate GovOps though. I mean, because we're really actively looking at that bill. The county.
Okay, just one
Yeah.
sentence. This is not intended to promote county government at all. These are temporary incentives for small towns who can't afford to pay for a consultant. The consultant could do completely different things for each municipality. It's just a financing mechanism. It is not at all indicating support for county government.
Okay.
Okay, shall I go to the next?
So I
Oh,
guess
sorry.
just to put a definitive point on it, we would say no one opposes considering it in our bill. But from a process standpoint, it would be good to know where government operations is going with it, because either way, government operations could pull our bill in to have, to look at
Oh.
this piece. So we need to know if they support it.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay,
Okay.
thank you. So
Yeah.
we'll figure
It's
that out.
Yeah,
Half of
it
us are
it
signed
would
on.
require quite a bit of work. I mean, it's a good sized issue to address.
Okay. Okay, shall I go to the next?
Yeah.
Maybe I should tell you all of them and then you can let me know what your priority is. The next one that I have is Act 250 self-certification. And that's something that I worked with the NRB leadership on.
Sure, that sounds
And
relevant.
There was no.
And where did it
opposition
get
so far.
sent? Did it get sent to Senate
No,
Natural?
no, it's here. It
Oh, it
just
is?
didn't get sent anywhere. Well.
It got
let me-
introduced.
That's the one that I missed the deadline.
Oh, I know what that feels.
So, I am bringing the language here.
Okay.
It's very, short, simple language.
Oh,
Okay.
that's
Um,
not either 228 or 275?
No, it doesn't have a number.
Oh, okay.
So,
Sorry, I'm-
so what it would do, it would provide an inexpensive addition to the enforcement tools that are available to the NRB. The problem addressed is that relying on abutters to monitor permit conditions is not effective in all situations, and you probably know that the NRB only has 2 compliance staff. Conditions such as recurring payments or environmental actions out of sight from the boundary could be more reliably enforced through self-certification. So what this bill does is it allows the NRB to require periodic reports from permit holders certifying that they are in compliance with all of the conditions of their permit. And they're not required to require these. It's an option that they could use at their, when it seems appropriate. And the value of it is, as I said, it's difficult to enforce some of these very complex permits. They would also be helpful when a property changes hands, because especially when corporations buy and sell properties, Act 250 permits can be pretty complex. And so this is a way to remind the owner of what is necessary, what their obligations are. And if they have that certification requirement, it's a good reminder.
Could we ask Sabina
Of course.
to comment? Would this be something that you could manage, and can you introduce yourself?
Well, I'd like to have a conversation with our general counsel,
Okay.
but to Senator Harrison's point, there are instances where properties change hands and the potential buyer is unaware of situations with a permit and things like that. It may be helpful.
So is it not required that if they're with a purchase, that all those are disclosed?
Yes, it's supposed to be. It is a requirement, but
Okay.
sometimes it just.
Are the permit requirements attached to the deed? Because that's usually when you'd find out if there were any restrictions on the deed.
I'm at a loss. I'm not 100% sure, but the permit conditions do transfer with
The property.
the property.
So it might be
I
a
don't know if
good
they're
thing to
in
have
deed
that,
per se.
because any other impediments on the deed would be attached. So that might be a way to do it.
Yeah,
That might be a simple way to do it.
Then you would know when you bought the property, you have to get
yeah.
a declaration,
Mhm.
from the lawyer that the deed is free and clear. So
Right.
that would be a good way to do that.
Yeah. Madam Chair, if I could just speak to that, the
Sure.
permits are filed with the clerk on the land, with the land
Right.
records. So that's as
It
much as
should
any,
be.
yes,
Yeah.
it should
Right,
be.
so putting a hook in that process, I think.
Yeah.
Right, but
Mhm.
I think that hook is there, which is good, which
Yeah.
it should be.
Can I ask a
Just tell the
specific
person to do one
question
more step.
that maybe,
It's already there.
Sabina, you can answer? When we've heard from individual towns that, Stratton's retention pond breached and worsened the situation downstream for a lot of communities, does anyone go talk to Stratton and say, you need to build a bigger retention pond now, or we need to see what the circumstances were? Is that an A&R question?
I think
Is that
that's an
coming in?
A&R question.
Okay,
Pass the baton.
that's fine, because we know
That
you don't have to answer that now. We can wait for Heather.
Billy Coster, Agency Natural Resources. I'm not entirely familiar with this situation, but generally, if there's an impact that requires reconstruction of some permitted stormwater infrastructure, there's a consultation program to see if an amendment is needed. Typically, it sounds like this was like a one-off instance.
Oh, no, it's happened before.
Okay, so again, I'm not.
But we
familiar with it.
sat Stratton and, yeah. Big
So when we
problem
go
with
to
And all those
Heather,
permits have, they're kind of time bound, so they need to be renewed on an ongoing basis. So at the
Okay,
point of
so-
renewal, they would look at whether the existing conditions are sufficient and
Is
upgrade
sufficient.
those. So, there is a process there, but I can't speak to this one.
It's Jamaica, it was the Jamaica town manager,
Mhm.
and the confluence of that breaching, and it's happened before, so. Yeah, you should just know that.
Good to know, right?
So committee, how do we feel? This doesn't live anywhere else. It makes sense, probably it would start in our bill and go to natural resources.
Well, it sounds like there might be a simple fix to this.
That's,
I guess either fix, it doesn't exist,
Wendy
so.
seems to think that it's there.
yeah, Mayor,
Mhm.
the land records do include the Act 250 permit. So
You should know.
that is, yes, but that's not the only reason for this bill.
Mhm.
The other reason for this bill is to ensure compliance with the permit.
Right.
The letting a new owner know is, to me, a secondary, benefit. But the primary benefit is having a relatively no-cost way for the state to,
Enforce.
enforce.
Yeah.
Because it's self-enforcement.
Right.
Which is always better, because the owner of the property knows the property better than anyone else. They know the conditions. When they certify on whatever schedule, that's a good.
Senator Clark.
So Madam Chair, I think this is a good thing for us to continue to explore. Peter and Sabina will get back to us, and maybe anybody else who's, but I think this is definitely worth at least exploring further.
So
Great.
it might not make it in today's version of the bill,
It
probably
won't.
won't, but, and we'll take your last
And what are we
bill and
calling
discuss
that?
it.
Self-certification. Do
But
you-
at some point today, if you could email Ellen and copy me
Oh, Ellen has it. Ellen drafted it.
and just say, can you include it in the
Sure.
Be Home bill?
Yes, I will.
The committee's approved it for the Be Home bill.
Thank you.
And you have one more?
So I have vacant commercial buildings, and then the JOs not required for exemptions.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also received the mobile home park language. So your choice, which one.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Maybe we save the mobile
Mobile
home
home
park
park is-
language
yeah.
and discuss as a committee, because I think
Okay,
we were all
mhm.
sort of
Good,
keen on including
perfect.
Can you put
aspects of that.
Okay, so,
half an hour next week for mobile home park recommendations?
great.
Would you like to bring the chair of the committee as well, the mobile task force?
We could probably invite.
Yes,
It's
That's
her, right?
the appropriate,
Yeah, just invite him.
Yeah,
that's
Representative,
the protocol.
Right, yeah.
and he's expecting to testify too.
Right, okay.
Okay, so S 275, vacant commercial buildings. And this bill is in response to our discussions at
Yes.
meetings last year
Yeah,
in this committee regarding vacant commercial buildings, because we saw that they were a problem for the community and a public problem. So the bill permits a municipality to assess a civil penalty after a building has been determined by a duly authorized municipal officer to be vacant for 180 days. It needs more detail. It needs to be fleshed out. The specifics need to be fleshed out, but the authority would be given to the municipalities to take action, potentially fine.
Yeah.
which they already have.
But I mean, we're talking about private property,
Yes.
somebody owns it.
Yes,
It may be, there isn't a lot of market for downtown real estate right now. So are you punishing somebody for something they can't control? Or are you just getting, like we had on some stories in Montpelier, somebody who just refuses to do it because you want my property taxes?
that is exactly the problem.
Yes.
And the second category, somebody who just refuses to do it, what we talked about last year, that also includes refusing to do it because the company is paying the rent for that building in order to not allow a competitor to come into that building. So it's
I think it's both.
it's a challenge.
And also we face,
So-
it's a real nudge to highest and best use of our buildings in our downtown
Exactly.
village center.
Well, there's
Exactly.
also the issue of the owner who has been diligently trying to rent the property, has been unable to do so, and now you're punishing him for an economic loss that he's already incurring.
So that kind of situation would be exempt. So-
Well,
Well, doesn't say that.
we need to define
That's
that
what I'm-
sort of situation.
That's the
so
work
that-
we'd have to do.
Yes,
And then how do you define that he's diligent, that person is diligently trying to rent it?
exactly. That's
And
We
and
make
at what
people on
price? Because
unemployment
then you're making judgmental
Yeah.
calls as to the amount that the person is seeking to rent, because by saying, well, the person is asking for too high a rent, so this is, I think, a real.
Randy,
can
we,
of worms.
we do that with
Right.
unemployment insurance now. We require certain things of people in all sorts of ways in the state
Well,
government.
and that's why I just
Materially different
drafted
than
it so that we would be able to discuss it.
Okay, yeah,
So it's definitely not ready for prime time.
having dealt with an entire block that was
Yeah.
priced way above the going rent, and asking, why don't you lower the rent to what the rest of, what we can't afford to do that? And I said, you can't afford to do that, but you can afford to have half this building empty. But this was a big developer, and sometimes you need a loss.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's another situation.
But we don't need it
Yeah.
at the public goods expense.
Right.
I'm sorry, our objective here is to try and create the highest and best use of our precious downtown and village centers. We want them fully occupied and used as much as we can encourage
Do one
that.
more.
The
So
one
let
more
me
We
was,
can argue
was-
that at
We
length.
can argue
yes,
that.
was S
I want a legal
228.
opinion.
Okay, well,
And we can do that another time if you like.
Let's preview it. I think what I would say is I'm hearing enough interest to move it forward in this bill. You absolutely have to address this concern about, punishing
this one.
someone. Yes,
Oh, yeah.
this one for market forces out of their control. And a lot of the work to get this ready would have to be done outside of committee, like negotiating all of these language details and challenges, just because we don't have 3 hours.
Right.
I think this one, we need some legal opinion on it.
We need
Right.
legal opinion on everything.
Who's the director of that one?
This
Municipal.
is
Tucker?
Tucker.
John, I think. John or Tucker.
I believe it's Tucker. I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
And is this a GovOps thing?
It could be, and it could be
If it's
part of our regional bill. But, also just as we did
Well,
with
they-
short-term rentals, we gave towns the ability to create these ordinances even if they didn't have charters.
And
Right.
And
so
this
still have
bill
to be
was
passed
sent
by
to
the
us.
voter.
This bill was
Okay,
sent to
that's good, okay. So, just to Senator Clarkson's point, this could be an enabling language where they still have to get a vote
In the
from the
municipality,
town
yeah,
to create this kind of penalty.
right, because
yes,
there are many towns that have already acted on this.
Oh,
And
they
have
have.
vacancy taxes and vacancy.
Oh, so do we need to?
Let's hear from
Evidently-
Ledge Council.
Okay.
yes. And they did indicate that this would be helpful to
Yes.
municipalities to have this additional.
Okay.
It's
Authority.
very similar to what we did with short-term rentals.
Okay, so we're willing,
Done it.
I think actually Woodstock has done it.
well,
Although
so we're
it's not
willing to ask more questions.
feet.
We can't
Okay,
spend maybe more than an hour in committee wrestling with some of these details.
Okay.
But, so you can line up
It's very
some
much
witnesses to answer these
a lot
questions
of
here. And we need to
And it goes
see
to your-
more, detailed language about who's exempt from this. But I guess also it's up to the municipality, but we probably wanna give them guidance.
yeah, I'd like the municipalities to maybe take ownership of this too.
Right, right. Okay.
Okay, so
But
S
just tell us the last one in a sentence.
S-228
Okay.
is, I think it's a fix of what we did
Oh, it's a
last year in the
JO
home
issue.
bill. And, requiring JOs for properties who are exempt, I believe will reduce the amount of housing being built. So it, decreases the effectiveness of what we plan to do. And the way the language is written now, projects that occur in 23, 24, 25 don't need a JO until 26. So that doesn't make sense. So the language certainly needs to be fixed. And my recommendation, if the exemptions are still on the same time frame, would be to require a JO at the limit date, which is why it's 2026, to prove that the development was started under the period of the exemption. The purpose of the exemption was to mimic the situations for folks who are not at the threshold yet, under 9 units, 9 units don't need a JO. They're free to get one.
Right.
But some people get hives thinking about Act 250, and even if it's an easy process, it is intimidating. So it's not a good experiment.
So we should move on. What I'd say
Yes.
about this one is we've talked to Environment and Energy and other committees. Everyone's thinking about some kind of bridge that gets us past the sunsets we put in, that gets us to a tiered map. That's the direction we're going, so this will come up. I just don't think we need to put a specific fix in right now until we sort out where it belongs and if we need it, because we're otherwise gonna create exemptions that are a bridge anyway, so.
Madam Chair, that makes a lot of sense to me. I just
Yeah.
don't want to forget about this.
Yes, we won't.
Okay.
Okay.
And as long as you're here, we run.
Right, okay, so for now, let's put one of them, which one was it? We're putting one in.
It's the idea that's not yet drafted. I mean, it's drafted,
No,
but
it
not
is drafted,
introduced. Not introduced.
self-certification and
Put
the stormwater
self-certification in
utilities.
the bill, not stormwater utilities. We're not doing
Well, we're gonna
Nope.
check with,
And you can check with Ruth.
Yeah, but for now, don't put it in the bill.
Okay.
So we'll put self-certification in the bill for now, you can tell Ellen, and everything else, let's just keep working on.
Ellen will be here in an hour, but she's right now flat out, just getting
Right,
it.
so it's just next week.
I am perfectly fine.
Thank you
Thank
for all
you.
this thoughtful work, and you have to go to somewhere else.
Natural resources.
Okay.
Oh, well, we
Thanks.
have a lot of natural resources right
We're
here.
all just up and down the hall.
That's
Okay, sorry for the delay, we have, I think,
Good
Heather
luck.
Pembroke in the witness chair.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think you've been before our committee, am I sure? Okay. Well, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
For the record, I'm Heather Pembroke. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Conservation, which is one of 3 departments in the Agency of Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife, Forest and Parks being the other 2. Thank you for inviting me, Madam Chair, to discuss the DEC permitting process. I'm going to begin with our overall position on the housing bill that's relevant, and then other areas that we're open to changing. The A&R Director of Policy and Planning, Billy Coster, will then address the intersection between A&R and the Act 250 permitting process. And as it's envisioned in the proposal of Section 3 of H 719. Lastly, Adam Miller, who's joining us via Zoom, he is a DEC Division Director of Environmental Compliance, which is the folks who help coordinate the permitting at the department, and he'll address kind of our overall philosophy on navigating DEC permits and customer service, which is part of what we were asked to provide testimony on. I also want to acknowledge that there's a larger conversation going on within Act 250 and permitting, as is often the case, and that we're part of that process as well. We've been participating in that as well.
Exactly which larger conversation are you talking about? Because there's like galaxies of conversation.
Many, yes.
All of that, it sounds like.
That doesn't count in the halls in this room.
We are supportive, A&R and DEC are supportive of the proposal as set forth in 719.
We've heard a big
719
overview of 719.
Okay.
719 is the House. We're doing our bill
Right.
here.
Right.
I really feel strongly that, for example, are you supportive of all the recommendations coming from the NRB report? That matters more to me than 719,
And
which
just
is,
whatever section 3 is, the principles there.
Yeah, I think probably, luckily we have Alex here who can speak to that if that's
Yeah.
appropriate. Okay.
Do you want to remind us the big picture of what section 3 is of 719?
I don't even have, I'm gonna speak to it.
Okay. Okay.
okay, but actually, the recommendations from the NRB task force, the necessary updates to Act 250, where are you on that?
Right, I mean, this is what I know, and please feel free to jump in, but that the NRB report wasn't necessarily done with the
Yes.
light of the housing crisis, so we kind of think of them a little bit differently.
Yes.
And I have not read the Senate's proposed bill, so I actually can't speak on that.
That's fair. We're walking through it later today.
But you've read the report.
Everything.
But broadly, is section 3 designations? Is it, can someone just say that now so we're not like?
Section 3 of 719, it speaks to the role of DEC permits in Act 250 and making, have a stronger, not duplicating efforts in Act 250.
So collateral permits
Yes.
would be, is that dispositive versus?
So it doesn't exactly do that, and I can, if you want me to, I can jump right ahead to what I was gonna talk about.
Is that okay with you, Heather? Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to?
No, just
Okay.
essentially that, you know, we're providing testimony and that Billy and Adam are here to kind of
Oh,
go into
great.
details.
Okay, well, stay right there if you
Okay.
can.
All right.
Is that okay, Billy?
Yeah, sure.
We just.
So again, Billy Coster, Director of Planning and Policy for A&R. I help manage our participation in Act 250. We're a party in Act 250, we're not the decision maker. And as you're discussing, many of projects that go through Act 250 also need permits from our agency, primarily
Yes.
DEC. And under existing NRB Rule 19, those permits can in some instances be used to satisfy certain Act 250 criteria. So you
Right.
can get a state wetlands permit and use that as evidence that you comply with Act 250's wetlands
Right.
criteria. Currently, that presumption of compliance can be rebutted. That
Right.
means that a party can raise concern about whether that permit is adequate or sufficient to address those criteria and effectively kind of relitigate the robustness of that permit in the Act 250 process.
Mhm.
After it's gone through full public process, comment, and the
Right.
opportunity for appeal at A&R.
Right.
So that can be challenging, that can slow things up, and it just kind of undermines all the work that happens prior to that. So
Right.
the NRB study recommends change to that, makes those permits dispositive where they can't be rebutted.
Specific to those issues, like if they get a wildlife endangered species permit, you can't relitigate the specific species
Correct,
that were discussed.
right. And
But
there's
you could
not-
bring up like turkey vultures. if
Exactly,
you
and
want,
there's
for
not
example.
always like an exact one-to-one match between the permits and Act 250 criteria, so there's often that interstitial space that you
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about that Act 250 would still own, but anything that's covered by the permit would be settled by the permit.
Okay.
So that's part of the proposal. The other issue that I think Section 3 of the bill tries to address is the kind of process and sequencing. Currently, the Act
Is this what I was saying to Ellen? Oh my God.
This
okay,
is
I
just
feel
what we
less
were
crazy.
talking about.
Yeah.
Right, so Act 250's rules give the commissions the ability to basically hold issuance of an Act 250 permit until those other state permits that are being
Right.
relied on are issued. And that could delay issuance of Act 250 by weeks and months in some
Yes.
instances, creates uncertainty, whatnot.
So concurrent permitting.
Right, so I think that's Section
Yeah.
3, that's what Section 3 tries to do. I would
Okay.
encourage you to talk to the NRB to see if those words actually have that outcome.
Meeting is
because,
scheduled.
yeah,
Okay.
Funny, they're,
Right, so I think that's the intent. I think, you know, we as an agency and DEC especially have really invested in our public outreach. We have this whole environmental notice bulletin. You all passed laws that have increased having public engagement.
Yeah.
So we feel like our permitting process is strong.
Mhm.
There's opportunities to challenge and appeal it, and that they should kind of stand on their own and not be relitigated in Act 250. So we support these proposals.
Okay. Is that all you wanted to?
Unless there's more you have questions about.
I'm sure we
that's
have
what I was gonna
questions.
specifically speak to.
Okay. Question.
no, that was helpful, actually, to an
Okay.
earlier conversation we've had today.
And always happy to come back with you.
I'm looking at my phone because I like keep a list of questions on my phone.
Yeah. So just
Go ahead.
also to add
Yeah.
on to that conversation that we're having, we can have concurrent permitting requests, but that's sort of counterintuitive. If we want to have one permitting process honored all the way through the process, then wouldn't we want to have it staged so that we get through the A&R and local permits and then we go to Act 250 instead of concurrent? Because concurrent would be add to some of the challenges here. It doesn't make it clearer for anybody wanting to build these projects. So you go through step 1, 2, and 3, and then you go to Act 250?
But they would have agency to decide.
So I think that is best decided by the applicant, right? Like what risk do they want to assume? Because in some instances, like there's permits that you need at the very beginning of a project, like
Right.
a stormwater project, a wetlands permit. And you may want to like start building foundations and doing initial site work early. permits that you need later, like a water supply permit to make sure that you've got like a well that can supply what you need for potable and water, like, you're not gonna need that service for many, many months, if not years into your construction process. If you're willing to take the risk that you'll get that permit eventually, some people want to start construction on their foundation and go through the 2 to 3 month process required to get those water supply permits. So yeah, I think for simple projects, people generally will want to come with all their agency permits in hand to Act 250 and just deal with it once. But there have certainly been instances where concurrent or a different sequence in the rule
Makes
allows makes sense for people.
Okay.
Okay, so I have a couple questions for you to react to. One, in the entire pre-application phase and all the confusing, which permits you get first, what is true, what is speculation from your engineer, it's been proposed that we might have an ombudsperson. So, I mean, do you have a commitment to customer service on your end, or do we need someone to be
I'll speak to
offering
that
that?
quickly and then let Heather and Adam. So my office coordinates Act 250 review for the agency.
Mhm.
We are always, and often people will come to ANR programs before they go to Act 250 because they know we do wildlife stuff, different permits. We are always happy to meet with people, to schedule scoping meetings, to talk about what permits they need, what site constraints exist, and advise them on all those issues.
Okay.
So that's an existing thing that we have. We also have the Permit Navigator in Adam's shop, which is an online tool to provide information about permits. So we do those services now if people ask.
In addition to this concurrent permitting issue, it's come up, someone testified about another kind of uncertainty he had, which is he wants to do 27 units in Montpelier. He wanted to build the first 9 under the threshold with the kind of water sewer capacity that could extend to all 27 units. But he was told by some of the professionals in the process, you could be penalized for starting to build with a bigger project in mind. For him, it's a cash flow issue. He's like a high school teacher, so getting those 9 units built to be able to engage in the rest of the process seemed very reasonable. I don't think it's written down anywhere you can't do that, but we're thinking about making things like that more explicit so people know that they have a right to do that.
Well, and I mean, I've seen projects do that. I mean,
Right.
in Woodstock,
But
Stafford
sometimes the
Common is
person who's trying to do everything right gets penalized for sort of not wanting to.
That's I think a question for the NRB. I think there is a
Okay.
risk if you're intentionally planning to do something bigger and you start with like a sub-jurisdictional development. I think there may be some risk there. I know that you can certainly phase projects in Act 250, so you can go in and say, eventually I'm gonna build 30 units.
Well, that's kind of, he
And
wanted to
I
do it
just want a
right.
construction permit
Yeah.
for the first 9, then I'll come back. So that option exists.
Right, I think he was worried that if he came and said, I'd like to do 27 units, but I want to build the first 9 right now, is that okay? They'd say like, no, you can't build the first 9.
My guess is it needs
Just to
a more
clarify.
explicit conversation with NRB.
Okay.
I mean, and
Like a master plan permit.
yeah, exactly. I mean,
Right.
this is what I'm able to do now, but this is what I'm hoping to do in 10 years. That doesn't strike me as challenging.
I mean, we just have like 1 minute left, but so maybe I won't. Just something to think about is soil issues keep coming up. As we talk about development. Go ahead, Senator.
Big, because we
Yeah.
have $1 million just added on to our Windsor
Right.
project at the Windsor Wyndham Housing Trust in downtown Windsor, and we have to spend $1 million getting rid of all this contaminated soil that they're just gonna build a huge building on top of, which makes absolutely no sense. And we just take contaminated soil to another state and contaminate it. So I don't, to me, that's like a game. That's a waste of time and effort.
Adam raised his hand. Is that
sorry.
okay?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Adam Miller. I'm the Environmental Compliance Division Director for DEC. My group, part of our mission is to provide customer service to a lot of folks that go through the environmental permitting process. One of the tools that Billy Coster mentioned was our Permit Navigator tool, which is something that came about during the CARES Act funding. So we were able to institute this tool. It's actually a pretty amazing tool. A member of the public or business can go online, drop a dot on a map, say what they want to do, answer a series of yes, no, I don't know questions. And at the end of that questioning process, it provides them with a number of permits that they might need, either based off the answers to their questions or based off data that we have, information that gives. Oh,
Can
I'm
you
sorry,
send
what was
us,
that?
Adam, can you send us that link so that we can see it and experience it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I
And yeah,
don't know how
one,
that helps answer the soils question.
No, I think he was probably speaking to both, or,
Oh, okay.
yeah, and we have a limited, yeah, go ahead.
and I was just gonna say, a lot of the information that's provided at the end of their permit navigator result has like the type, description of the permit. It's geolocated for the person that would be associated with that area. So if you had a stormwater permit and it was in a certain district, it gives you that person's contact info, provides you a link to the application, and also gives you a time frame for what it normally might take for a permit and the associated costs with that. So I just wanted to mention before we ran out of time, just the level
Okay.
of customer service that we're working to provide.
Yeah, are you also a soils person?
So we can address, I can have Matt Chapman, who's the head of our waste
Yeah.
management division.
We know that well.
Yes,
Right.
okay.
Adam, I just want to say, Navigator tool isn't it is a tool. It's not a person. For me, customer service is a person. Sorry. So, when you talk about customer service, I'd say it's a tool that you can use, but tools don't always answer the questions fully. And in some ways, it would be great that for every project to have a navigator buddy that they walk, that takes them through, and that they can call anytime they have a concern, because I think a lot of the frustrations and concerns would be alleviated with a real person that they could be assigned to every project and they could go to with questions and that they would get back to.
Absolutely.
Just saying.
And we do realize that some people want more one-on-one interaction, which is actually why we have a team in our environmental assistance office that if anyone ever wants to talk through a project and talk to a real face, not necessarily go through the computer algorithm, there's always that opportunity. And we actually have people reach out whenever they have questions, or not everyone has reliable means to technology and internet access. So we want to make sure that there's not just a computer to talk to, but also a person to talk to.
So, Adam, would you send us that, how people enter the environmental assistance, access that person or that office?
Absolutely.
And is that something that's on the DEC website, environmental assistance?
Yep.
Okay, so it's all there. Okay, great, perfect.
So is there also some kind of mediation process, or can you get involved if they, also what I've heard anecdotally is they're talking to one person about one of these permits, and that person is the authority, they can't go to anybody else, they can't, unless they were jumping politically to try and talk to you or Julie or somebody, they don't have a way to sort of find some common language about what the concern is in some of these permits. Do people come to you and say, I'm having a hard time engaging with this staff member around this permit, can you help me?
It certainly comes to me sometimes, but
Okay.
I think it probably more commonly goes to Adam.
Okay. I just want to make sure people know they have some option, because not everyone is politically engaged, right? I think the Indians, for example, now come to me because they're like, oh, we know somebody in government. And there's so many people who don't feel like they have someone they know to talk to. So is that kind of offered to them up front?
Good question.
Yep, I would say a lot of the staff in the environmental compliance division are very much so generalist. So we like to think that if they're running into issues with a particular, like they don't know where they should go in a project, what we try and do is work with that individual to figure out like who is the right person to talk to. Our staff aren't necessarily subject matter experts, but we want to get them connected with other individuals. If they have a tough time getting in touch with someone, we've had people reach out before and we work to kind of problem solve and figure out where the logjam is and getting in touch with that individual. And sometimes it's mixed up contact information. Other times it's more technical that our staff can't help with, but that's why we kind of recommend them to a certain program.
Right. You know, compliance isn't like a warm and fuzzy.
No.
Like just as a note. And so many people who've come before us have said, we don't know where to go. Like we don't even know what the accurate information is. So I don't know if there's a more, proactive, I mean, maybe you're doing it, I don't know, but we've had a lot of witnesses who've never brought up your office or permit navigator.
This is the first we've heard in this whole discussion in 2 years on some of this housing, that there's an environmental assistance program.
Yep, and I will say we're part of the.
I think that you need to market that better for all developers.
Senator Brown.
That's just one of my questions is how do people know you exist?
Well,
they look at the tape.
Part of our program, so we have our environmental compliance division, right? And what we do is we ensure Vermonters follow the rules and regs. We do that 2 realms. We do that reactively by having an enforcement team, but we also have the proactive wing, which we call the Environmental Assistance Office. There's 3 separate sections of that. We have what we call like our accessible assistance section, which works with underserved, underrepresented Vermonters and communities of Vermonters. We have our what we call our outreach assistance section, which specifically works to put out media and outreach to promote a lot of these assistance activities and to get folks the information they need to be able to comply with rules and regulations. And then we have our municipal assistance section, which is specifically targeted on going out and working directly with municipalities and communities. That's kind of how we've organized that structure to try and get folks in. You might have heard of a lot of other programs that we have. Like one example of our Environmental Assistance Office program is like our Healthy Homes program that works specifically with, low to moderate income Vermonters and manufactured housing communities to help out. So we go by a number of different names. I would say the assistance section itself is what we call our proactive end of environmental compliance.
Okay, proactive marketing.
Yes, if you come up with any ideas about how we can help you, we are here.
We send you to Heather Pelham. She can market you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We're running a low on time. But it would be nice as we mock up the bill to have someone from A&R sitting with us. So, we've asked Alex to be following the schedule, but a lot of our questions are for A&R. And like to the extent that someone could be sitting in here, that'll be really helpful.
Yeah, we're happy to come back, absolutely.
Starting next week, we'll just be spending a lot of time with the language of the bill.
Yeah, just to monitor our agenda and see
Okay.
what might work.
Okay, sounds good. All right.
More work for you to do. Yeah. Thank you so much. Nice to have you in our community.
Lovely to meet you.
Okay, VNRCVCD. Good morning, Phil. Good morning.
It is good morning. It's going to be good morning all the way to the floor.
Right. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. For the record, my name is Lauren Hurl. I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Conservation Voters. I'm also currently serving as a Montpelier City Councilor in a
great
community where we're experiencing a severe housing shortage, have skyrocketing housing prices, have an ever-growing unhoused population, and of course are a community that was recently devastated by a climate disaster. Which also then destroyed more housing units. So just all of these experiences really inform my perspective as we think about really both the housing and the climate crisis. And I think basically the thrust of just the high level that I wanted to share with you is just the urgency of keeping both of these crises front and center as you shape policy so we can, do the housing development that we desperately need in ways that are climate smart. So that's kind of the takeaway that I just want to keep in mind.
Those are the 2 crises we're navigating this session.
Yes.
And actually have been for
many years. So one of the major projects BCV does every year, as I think you all know, is developing the Environmental Common Agenda, which hopefully you all
Yes,
received
thank
a
you.
lovely copy of. And,
It's great.
you know, really try to look at what are the major issues facing the state and highlight the policies that are ready for action. We had a record number of organizations work with us to develop it this year. And it included community-based groups, faith community, elders, health professionals, socially responsible businesses, groups from different parts of the state geographically, really trying to you know, provide a whole range of perspectives. We continue to work to expand this network. There's still tons of work to do there to be reaching more and more people and helping shape the environmental community priorities, but we are kind of growing that network, and it's a big focus of ours. And of course, we did identifying, you know, addressing the housing shortage, including affordable housing through smart growth policies as a really core environmental community priority, which, you know, this wasn't always on the environmental agenda. So it's exciting, and I think just underscores that, you know, we all recognize how critical this is. You know, a lot of us have spent a lot of time with the state's climate action plan, which of course identified smart growth housing, smart growth development as a key climate strategy. You know, again, you all know well the many co-benefits of smart growth, where you can, you know, reduce transportation emissions, you can foster density, have better biking and walking opportunities. Public transit becomes feasible when you have more density. Things like better EV charging networks, microgrids and geothermal networks for heating. You know, so you get all of these benefits, as you know, through dense development. And the climate action plan, and, you know, important to us in the environmental community is, and I know like the package of policies you all are looking at, is how are we really encouraging smart growth housing and simultaneously protecting critical ecosystem services at the same time, knowing that our human communities rely on a healthy environment as well as housing and other urgent needs. We're right now, for example, having conversations in the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee about how we're allowing protection and restoration of floodplains and wetlands that are going to be critical to protecting our downtowns. So, you know, all of this has to happen in smart, thoughtful, well-planned ways. BCB had supported the creation of the Act 250 Commission a number of years ago. We've supported a variety of kind of Act 250 reform and housing bills through the years. We were really grateful for the work you all did on the home bill last year and supported that. I think that was a great step forward. And then we were excited by the work that the Act 250 committee stakeholder group did. And so, you know, we are really think that put forward a set of thoughtful recommendations, and, you know, using that as kind of a baseline, which is what I heard earlier this morning as an approach. So just really want to kind of emphasize that like we fully support that. You know, it was really exciting to see the Vermont Chamber of Commerce and the NRC and RPCs and affordable housing groups and large developers and, you know, this whole range of stakeholders kind of come together, and recognizing that there is really a suite of policies that get at these, you know, multifaceted goals that people can get behind. And so I think we're at a really exciting moment to make the kind of reform of Act 250 people have been talking about for years. And, you know, in that report, you know, it just really looking at jurisdictional changes in Act 250 to provide exemptions where it makes sense to encourage development, where there's assurance that municipal land use regulations can appropriately guide development, so there is no need to apply Act 250, and identify recommendations for steps to protect our forests and other natural resources to help simultaneously address the climate and biodiversity crises that we're facing alongside the housing crisis. You know, we do just want to make sure that as we're looking at it, we're not putting in exemptions that are so broad that they could encourage the market to do scattered, you know, large housing. We really want to make sure that it's looking at how are we, you know, focusing our efforts on more dense housing that's affordable at a range of income levels, which, you know, again, I think is really in line with the home bill and what the conversations you all have been having for a number of years. And yeah, so just appreciate the opportunity to share these perspectives, and just want to bring the enthusiasm of the environmental community to the work and this kind of broad perspective on kind of finding this balance, making sure that we are taking real meaningful steps to address the housing crisis in climate smart ways. And yeah, John Groveman's here from VNRC who can get into the weeds on all of it, but I just really wanted to kind of representing the coalition that puts together the common agenda, to share that kind of big picture perspective and support, and, you know, using the Act 250 report as kind of the baseline is what we're excited to explore with you all. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
John, did you want to add anything before we get into the weeds?
John will be the weeds. So.
Okay, you are the weeds.
John served on the task force.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to, like, if you have questions, I mean, I've followed your testimony pretty closely.
Right.
You've heard from the RPCs, heard from Savannah. You know, if you have a question, you know, if you want to hear anything from VNRC about tiers 1A, 1B, and 3, I'm happy to address it.
Yeah.
I was going to speak to the appeals and governance questions because I know that they're in the draft, at least the early draft of the bill that you put out.
Let me kind of set the table before we go to questions. So,
because
I mean, number one, I hope you saw our joint hearing with Natural Resources. I think it just left us all, and I talked to Senator Bray feeling really positively that there's a lot of shared agreement. You know, that the NRB study and a lot of these studies set us up well for that. And I think we're talking about the same concerns as you get into the details in all of the committees. You know, how does this map functionally get made? That will be a very bitter fight. I've talked, as you may have heard me share, I think there needs to be friction from an environmental justice standpoint of taking developable land out of 1A and 1B on municipal water and sewer, which wasn't presupposed in the recommendations from the high level we saw it from, which allows us to do more protecting tier 3. And then, you know, I would say finally, I asked Charlie Hancock if we could like grab dinner, you know, soon, because I thought his testimony was really valuable at the joint hearing, that, you know, we also have to be sensitive to our rural areas and that we're not shoving everyone into 41 square miles of the state, you know, that there are seniors who want to live next to their grandkids, there are jobs needed, there are hospitals in our rural places, and I'm just going to name it, you know, outside of these designated areas and population centers, and where we specifically have tier 1B, when we're talking about the hamlets and the hills and valleys, you know, we want to, in a very intentional way, be looking at clusters of affordable housing. So before we start some session-long fight, you know, on 1055, you know, people get lost in that, but we want to be partners in talking very seriously about how we make sure our rural areas are vital as well.
And the House is, it sounds like, and we need to clarify
the appeals issue,
on the appeals issue, John,
right.
it sounds like the House is going to take the first stab at the deep dive on appeals. And the Board of Appeals idea, they're weighing the e-court expansion or the Board of Appeals or something else. But our priorities, I think, as a committee, at least what I've heard is really addressing time frames, limiting the time frame for appeals, number of appeals, and some skin in the game at a certain point. It may not be from the beginning, but access to justice is critically important, but also at a certain point, it's got to not be frivolous and it's got to not impede otherwise a public good that would be housing for people. So those are, I think, are the three areas we're hoping, and we'll be working and closely with Robin and Tom on that piece of the bill. But it sounds like, given our limited time,
and environment and energy, but I would say a suggestion came from Senator Clarkson this morning that I wanted us all to discuss when we have Ledge Council, the witness chair, but that we would take the appeals changes out of our bill and let the House work specifically on those, because we could go in so many different directions and get really deep, and both of us doing that work might be problematic, but that's up for discussion.
Right. Well, that's super helpful to hear. I could in 10 minutes just say what I have to say. I agree with everything that Lauren said on the record, just for BNC. So for the record, you would just say that,
I think it's fine.
Yeah.
Just because it's heavier. John Groveman, Policy and Water Program Director for BNRC. So on the rural, housing issue, you know, totally, we have the same concern. I think and I think a lot will be shown in the mapping, and I don't think the mapping will be hopefully a bitter fight.
Yeah,
I mean, I really think that, because the RPCs have really stepped up, it's really been incredible, you know, and the idea of basically, having the expertise, they have the technology to do this mapping now. You know, the NRB report says, looking at growth out 20 years. And to be honest with you, that's something that really pushed BNRC to the limits, you know. I think that to us means that these mapped areas are gonna be wider than, you know, like they have been in the past. But that's the housing crisis part of it, and as long as it's based on planning and information and protecting resources, it'll encourage, you know, we think that makes sense and that's fair. But I don't think it'll be a bitter fight. I think it'll be a reasoned debate about those maps. And what's really good about the NRB recommendation is that it involves the towns, like early on and integrally. And it's so.
The mapping process.
The mapping process, and then you'll go to a state authority to have another kind of view to make sure that the maps are right for exemptions and for protecting areas. And we all want to do this fast, so we're committed. It's going to be that's going to be the challenge more than I think.
So, may I just
area.
interrupt to ask John? So we want it done fast too. My ideal would be to have the mapping done by December 25. What carrot could we offer to towns? And we can think about this. You know, what carrots can we offer to make sure it happens by then? Because I think, we need to give, something we need to discuss is more support for the RPCs to help towns navigate this mapping discussion. Because so many towns already have planning, their town plans in place. This will hopefully not be a huge amount of additional work, because towns have done great work on their planning and on their, you know,
That's
their
a great
town
question.
plans.
I like to think about it.
Would you think about
Talk to the RPCs. You know, I think if you really look at the NRB approach, and this will come out as we really go, it's really the RPC is a mandate, and they want that mandate. That's what the exciting thing. They're saying, require us to do this. So towns won't have. Towns
We
won't
have to work on the
choice.
language so it
Yeah.
says.
Towns won't have a choice, you know?
Right.
They're gonna have to engage, and if they don't, the RPCs are going to do the work anyway.
Right.
But that language is really important.
Yeah.
So the last thing I'll say is, so on appeals, thank you for that clarification, super helpful.
Yeah.
But when
And that it's not decided, it's kind of us putting it out because we don't want us to be kind of at loggerheads unnecessarily.
When you finally get to the issue, like, I think, if so, this is BNRC's view, and we'll debate it all session, and it'll go through all the various committees, but, that we think the answer to efficient appeals is a good process, right? I think the same idea behind the Housing Board of Appeals, which we could support, is the same, it applies to really all of these land use decisions, is have a nimble board that's an expert, that, you know, it's not the court, and the court process could really get bogged down, and that could apply for housing appeals based on municipal zoning, but it could apply to Act 250. I would just, you know, caution, I think, like strict deadlines and penalties for people who appeal. It's a slippery slope, and it is a double-edged sword. You know, there are communities of citizens who are harmed by projects, and you start throwing it to the court or a quasi-judicial body about, well, you know, what's a frivolous appeal, what's a meritorious appeal, what's a appeal based on delay. What is the proper deadline for action that's going to make something go really fast when it could actually hurt like a community that is concerned about a project? And then you'll have like the debate about, is this the type of project that should qualify for that expedited timeline? So we would rather focus on a system that's fair, that moves quickly, it doesn't get bogged down. Because it's just, in my experience as a lawyer, you know, and I practice before the old environmental board. I'm in court, I have 2 appeals in the environmental court right now.
Yeah.
I've seen it all. Those are just some of the issues.
Right.
You're not old enough to have seen it
out there for you to think about.
Right.
As you.
But we
go
have,
through this.
we have 5 minutes, so maybe we could get into this, so by March, we're not completely in disagreement. And you know, I think Digger is doing an article about appeals right now, so you'll probably see some of my philosophy, but, you know, I think in a very big picture sense, there are a couple things, you know, driving what I'd like to see accomplished. One is at some point being able to say this is as long as the process could take. So, you know,
So certainty for developers.
for developers.
And everybody.
3 years, you know, but because the people who have no voice in the process are those who are unhoused. So, you know, we have to be thinking about them too, and the additional cost to a project of all of that uncertainty. You know, that was my first big principle. I was so on my high horse that, well, time frame, but you go.
Number, so I would say, representing Woodstock, number of appeals. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
I had it, as you know, we're the poster child for the delays, 10 years. We took an affordable project and made it unaffordable in 10 years. And luckily, because there were some very deep pockets involved, it still got built. It wouldn't have in another community, in my humble opinion. So I think time and number of appeals. And I disagree with you, John. I mean, yes, there are so many appeals that are critically important and that have strong merit, but I've also seen far too many. I mean, we're still living through Putney. I'm sorry. That just is.
I'm just saying
It's
that
just
you
got
have
to-
a big net, right? And you put the net out there,
Yeah.
and you capture lots of things in the net.
You've got to be
And-
thoughtful about the net.
And that some of the things capture the net to hurt underserved communities.
Okay,
and
so,
like,
yeah,
I'm
this
just saying
is
it's a double-edged sword.
To Senator Clarkson's
Yeah.
point, I think my big principle is at some point, you stop engaging in robust democracy and you start having tyranny of the minority. And, you know, Haiti Gallagher brought us the project in Waterbury where 80% of the community approved it and they still have the opportunity to appeal. So taking some of those appeals out that really feel like the community has spoken, you know, the issue's been addressed. Saying you can go all the way to the Supreme Court twice on a project is just, it doesn't feel like democracy anymore. It feels like really, you know, extorting a project at some point. And I don't think all of those appeals add value at some level. In fact, they detract from the community's voice.
It's really hard to write these standards in a way.
Agreed.
It doesn't have unintended consequences, and that, like, that's why if you're exempting more projects, then that's great. Like, so that they don't only have to go through one. If you exempt projects from Act 250 that are housing and even commercial and industrial, and then you have a housing board of appeals to like expedite. I mean, you know, we could debate. We just maybe we won't agree, but I just think that's the better way to do it than to try to come up with definitions of what's frivolous, what's meritorious, what time frame, you know.
So this is actually why, because this is such a big discussion, and we have 69 other sections of this bill that's already 86 pages long. This is why I would encourage my committee to let the House do the deep dive. They have a lot more time than we do. We get 3 hours every morning, which is insufficient for the other topics that we're one. And then we can react and work with what they have spent a lot of time developing. And that's why I'm recommending to our committee that we consider letting the appeals
start. Discussion, that's all.
And so you know where we're at.
Yeah, I saw, you know, some of the other testimony and I read the earlier version of the bill. And
right.
So anyway, I just wanted to put it on the table. Fair points all around, but it's super important, obviously, and big changes that will have a major effect on Vermonters and how these processes go. So that's all I'll leave it.
No, all important to hear.
Well, and I think what you can appreciate too is people who've been so intimately involved disagree on, should we bring back the e-board? Should we, you know, have all appeals go through here?
That's why there was no agreement and we didn't have time, and I agree, I understand that there are vigorous positions on both sides.
By very informed folks.
Christopher yesterday, what was Christopher's last? Christopher Roy, man, he said, I served on the e-board, do not bring back.
Right. I've been arguing with Chris Roy about this for 25 years.
We should just watch a debate. Can you sponsor a debate?
That's a great fundraiser.
Anyway, to be continued, but I just wanted to put it on the table.
Yeah, Senator Brock, give you the last word.
Let's not forget the underlying issue. The underlying issue is if you have clarity in terms of what the rules are you have a much lower probability of having or needing repeals in the first place. And I don't think we spend enough time focused on that.
I agree 100% with Senator Rock, and I'm
Yeah.
so glad to be able to say that sentence, and,
I'm glad somebody agreed to
And on a happy note.
I'm not gonna press my luck any more than
Your
that.
big things, or whatever you had.
I don't know what I have.
Thank
you for the time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Please
Molly.
come
Yeah,
back.
thank you, yeah,
We
More
don't
to
fight.
follow.
yeah.
We're just beginning.
We can have
Oh,
a debate.
may I just ask one last question, John? You served on this task force. Thank you for your work. I am hearing from other members of the task force that it's critically important that we adopt all 3 values and reports together, that you viewed it as a package. I do too, because we can't do the tier work until the mapping work's done, and that's why we have our exemptions for a period of time. And that the designations are obviously another key piece. So is it your understanding that your hope is that we would be adopting all 3, at least aspects of all 3 of those?
Yes,
Maybe
100%.
the whole, where else?
And the report is clear about that, and I wanted to say, like I've said in other committees, but hats off to Stefana and the MFB, they did an incredible job in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
It was a really good process, it was fair, you know, the Chamber of Commerce and the NRC, and, you know, large home builders and, you know, Cash and
Yeah.
Buyer all agreeing. I mean, really, they get a lot of credit, and that's why we want to see that work used.
Right.
Because it
Right.
is unusual.
Well, we had an Act 250 commission that lasted for 3 years, and we have stalemated on all
Yeah.
of that work.
Yeah.
So this was amazing that we were able to come to
We could
consensus
breathe
on
life
this.
into that, and that was the hope. And when we came here last year, you know, it was, the conversation last year was that we really have high hopes that this study is gonna take all that work
Yeah.
and then hone in on it and give you some recommendations you can work with. And I think it worked out better than any of us would have expected.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah.
And as Ellen gets in the witness chair, I just want us to be a little sobered that the details are really important. So you gave us a great gift, which is to start with a big picture we can all agree on, and then argue over the details, and that's tremendous in the legislature. We have a lot of details to work out, and, you know, we should all be part of that process and feel comfortable engaging with each other, and please have that public debate, you know.
Absolutely.
I'll
Yeah.
We've entered into, we're in it together.
I love to debate. Alice, anytime you wanna come over to the NRC office and debate.
You know who the-
Neutral territory.
You know who the formidable debater is? Actually Becca White, who was on the UVM team and really a
All right,
star.
bring Becca. I'll bring Lauren Hurl.
You were a debater too? Oh my God, I want to see more of those, that debate.
Debate next temporary.
My husband debated Becca.
Oh,
High school.
Wow.
That's funny.
So more to follow.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the time.
Yeah, thank you.
Are you getting thank you for your work, all of you?
It's the stakeholder too, I mean.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, looking at Alex, the whole, we'll sweep the whole, well, you know, those guys, but these guys.
Enough warm fuzzies. And we don't have a built-in break, so again, we can just take a break as you need.
Or explode.
Friday. And speaking of gratitude, you know, as we take these huge concepts and principles and actually put them in statute, Ellen foremost has a humongous task that she's been chipping away at. It's an almost impossible task. So we really appreciate you. Let's be really gentle about what we see or don't see in the language, because Ellen has a lot of competing voices.
That is,
her right now.
Is this on our website?
It should be, and
Okay.
Magali's gonna pass out some
That's
materials,
even better.
because this is hot off the presses.
thank you, Magali. This, yes, and I'd add one word, Chair,
Yes,
patience.
patient.
Her patience with us
Yeah.
is most appreciated.
I suppose if people around the room do want a paper copy, we can offer that.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
You have one extra now. Why don't you take one, and if someone else wants to raise their hand? Okay.
I think
Okay, so
everybody
it looks
probably-
like everyone who.
And this is a summary, so you may want a summary sheet.
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. Hello. Today
Hi.
I am here on draft 4.1 of the bill,
The Be Home Bill.
the home bill. Yes.
Keep our branding going.
We could take
And
bets
as
on how many
was just
drafts.
mentioned, there is an outline. It is not a summary.
Oh, sorry.
Because I did not really, have time. So there are some notes designating what is in each section, partially so that we can have track of what's in here so far. And also, it only includes the sections through section 46. I believe we get up to 70. So John did not have time to add his sections. So how the bill is structured currently, there's a couple of miscellaneous sections right at the beginning, then there's a bunch of Act 250 sections, and there's municipal zoning, then there's language on the tax credits, then there is the stuff from the Act 250 report.
Right,
Yeah. And then there's a few sections on taxes that I
right.
did not draft, that were drafted by the tax attorneys in my office. So, those are the sections I have sort of corralled so far.
Thank you.
And so John will add his sections soon. But this is probably what we're gonna get through today, or
We're
Thank
going to.
yes.
It'd be great if we
Thank
got through
you.
this.
Thank
So,
you.
in John's sections, just so people can keep them in mind, are the rental registry, or, the short-term rentals, the,
Anything David Hall used to do.
Anything housing that isn't
the
zoning.
curing,
right.
the curing eviction, the evictions pieces, all the other stuff. The mobile home work, the rental score, the credit score, a lot of that stuff. Right. So that's a lot of, also.
There's a lot, yes. There's a lot in general. There are 70 sections. So there are a few pieces of highlighting in this draft, and I'll just say off the top that it's not denoting changes necessarily. They're denoting sort of questions and holes.
Right.
So just,
Bearing with you.
yeah, I walked you through or talked you through some language in draft 3.1, but this is a lot of other stuff.
Yes.
So,
And it's stuff we've agreed to consider by simple majority that we might get into the details on or pull out.
yeah, and just as related to that, I will get to it mostly starting with the section 6 through whatever, but it is entirely H719 is in here.
Right.
As then also there's a few other bills mixed in here as well.
Right.
So,
It's a big dump. I mean, it's got a lot.
It's the lump of clay.
But that's great to have everything in one place.
it's ingredients in a bowl. Yes.
All the metaphors.
I'm sorry, wrong term. But it's,
Our minds all.
I think the lump of clay is better. It all rhymes, what can I say?
So the first section obviously is the title, and then second section is the same as I presented last time, which is a placeholder study related to identifying the adoption rate of FEMA building codes.
Right. This is our energy.
I don't know if we've had any. It's actually not energy.
Oh,
It's FEMA flood resistant building codes, which are different than the building codes that we have in Vermont. They line up. I do not know the full extent to which they actually line up. I think they potentially line up with some of our river corridor bylaw codes, but that's why there's a study to review and analyze, but there are blanks in it because you haven't really dictated who's going to actually conduct this study.
Right. I'm just writing down like community ratings, NFIP, like I don't know that we're gonna solve this, but there's a lot of related best practices that seem to be able to lower the cost of flood insurance and help a community know they're on the right track. And I don't know all of that, and we haven't heard anything
I was
definitive.
gonna say, what?
So we could decide, we don't know who could do the study and it can't happen, but it feels like what we heard is from NFIP is a lot of municipalities were not ready and did not have in place the provisions they were supposed to have in place before this flood. And that could ultimately affect our participation in the National Flood Insurance Program.
Okay, I know that the community has to be enrolled in flood insurance in
Right.
order for individuals. I know the city of Montpelier was,
Right, most of them are,
but,
yeah,
there's flood resistant buildings codes, but as we're finding, it's very difficult to move the city of Montpelier out of the flood zone.
right.
And, you know, these would be, I assume, building codes going forward, but they'd have, I mean, a lot of these things are tuned to the ocean.
Right.
I don't know that we want houses on stilts on Lower State Street, but that may be.
I don't know, go to Bangkok,
I
that's
want a
pretty
house.
amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what we're trying, if the towns have the building codes,
Right,
or they're in place, would these building codes be for future development, or would they be?
they'd be aspirational, for sure. But I just don't know that we have enough infrastructure, communication infrastructure to
Oh, we
even
do
know
not.
what we're aspiring to.
Right, we do not.
So I guess if Doug Farnham's listening, if someone could just, I would be willing to take comment from our emergency disaster recovery folks. If they are doing this already, great, we could take it out.
Why don't
But
we
I
just
don't
ask
wanna
Doug
lose
to
track.
comment?
Okay, so this is a Doug section.
It's a study by
And Eric.
Doug
Do you
to
wanna
identify.
identify yourself?
Flood resistant.
Yeah, Mike
Mike
DeRocher.
DeRocher, we haven't had him in.
So Mike and,
Okay, so it's a study.
and we need him on the rental registry.
Right.
I would
Mike
ask for
and
the
maybe
cities
Eric,
towns to do this.
Yeah.
Which Eric?
FEMA, FEM, VEM, Eric.
John Eric Kilgore.
Yeah,
Oh.
no, we've got Doug. Eric, who's the head of Vermont Emergency Management.
I'd ask the League of Cities.
Yeah, I was
Oh,
gonna say
VLCT,
VLCT,
that's
that's what I was gonna
VLCT.
say.
Sure,
They would,
half
they
these
would know.
towns,
Okay.
Most all of the
Yeah.
towns.
So there's nothing more for you to do right now. We're gonna see the
VLCT.
section C.
Yeah,
I mean, they have.
no, that's what I was gonna say, yeah.
They would-
Oh, maybe DFR.
We could
DFR,
have them in finance.
they're
Okay.
already studying
Right.
what happened, but they don't get in, you know, in what insurance covered,
Right.
and didn't cover in flood insurance. But they don't get into building codes.
Right.
So who are we
But to
having?
be fair, Kevin Gaffney said, Senator, you're right, we should be oriented more toward public awareness. So
Yeah.
I just don't know who's responsible for that after the fact.
Depends on who pays for it.
Exactly.
In part, yes.
Yeah, I mean, if we provide the money,
Well, add
there's
DFR in there.
people that will do it.
Okay,
Okay.
section 3, parking.
Yep,
What do we do?
Cruising right along.
We didn't do wastewater connection first.
we're on section 3, so
We're
on
on
page
it.
2.
Oh, sorry.
We're on page 2.
On page 2, next is section 3, so I did talk to you about this last time. In the Home Act from last year, you passed a provision related to parking. The effective date of that provision is not until December of this year, and so this provision would move up the effective date to July of this year.
Okay, so that's a technical correction.
Well,
No,
not for the town.
Absolutely.
So it's not a technical correction.
It's a big policy.
So that's for municipal parking, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
The mandated parking spaces.
The 1.5.
1.5.
Yeah.
so we need to let them know. That's another VLCT thing. We can have a VLCT list.
But they have been fairly
They know.
warned. They've
Right.
known
They know
that this
it's
is coming.
I mean, it's.
Did they know the deadline was changing? I'm not saying
No.
don't do it.
We
I'm
haven't
just saying
changed it.
we
Right.
need to let them
We,
know.
absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so then again, sections 4 and 5 are the wastewater connection permit language that you have reviewed for the last 3 years.
Yeah.
It hasn't changed.
And we have some wastewater local folks coming in because there's just been confusion about whether communities feel they can manage.
This is the
Yes.
duplication of
Yes,
hookup permits.
Exactly.
Yes,
Trying to reduce.
Yes.
but it gets pretty complicated. So
Yes.
I'm happy to read this and
Right, yeah, and we,
talk later.
You want to be the point person on sections
don't
4
know.
and 5?
But, I mean, I have been working on it,
Yeah.
yeah,
But,
I'm looking.
unless somebody else wants.
No,
to.
no, do that, that's good. But we also
4
have
and 5.
witnesses coming in.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, and just for, I have that note in there that's highlighted in yellow that you did already ask them to identify duplications. And I think I told you last time, they did update, A&R did an update of their rule this past summer, and they did reduce some duplication in their rule.
Right.
Oh, they
on their
did?
policy.
Oh, good.
Tell us what.
I know this,
A and R in here regular.
Well, we just had A&R.
well, I know, but when he said when we mark up the bill, they.
It's a big department.
Yeah.
So they did update things?
There was an update in their rule this summer, yes, regarding duplication with municipal permits. I looked at it, I can't really explain it to you because Mike, is the, person in our office that handles water, but we didn't flag it as, oh, didn't we talk about this?
Okay,
Yeah.
Okay.
Section 6, bottom of page 4.
Yep, so section 6, so this is the start of the Act 250 sections.
Okay.
So this is language that was in the prior draft as well. This would be creating the requirement that the district commission hearings on issuing Act 250 permits would be on the record. I think you talked to Judge Zone a little bit about this. On the I can read through the language if you want. On the record does really require a more formal hearing. Whereas currently the district commission process is more informal and doesn't necessarily follow strict rules of civil procedure or evidence. It's much more of a non-legalistic process to some extent. So this would be shifting to a more formal process, which would then feed into how the appeals work at the environmental court level.
Can we ask the district commissions if they feel they have the capacity to do this?
That's a good question. And it's in Sabina and a district. We should have asked Chris as the former.
Well, that's why we said we're staying with
Yeah.
it. So,
Does this impact their quasi judicial status in any way? Does it change it?
No.
Okay.
No, it would require them to be almost more quasi-judicial because it is a more formalistic process closer to a case.
Okay.
And so there are, as Judge Zone seemed to know the number was 12, there are 12 towns that are currently doing this sort of by choice for their municipal zoning permits. I don't know if you want to hear from any of them. I do think anecdotally, I've heard it is the towns with more staff.
Yeah, sure.
Because you do have to sort of run a hearing as opposed to, but anyways, it is more formal. So, but that in turn leads to that instead of de novo hearings at the environmental court, they're on the record appeals, which is a more narrow type of appeal than de novo.
It was okay, but this is one of the, we talked about this at the steering committee. I won't say anything on this.
Sure,
It'll
go
be
ahead.
helpful.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is one of the areas where it's hard to get agreement because what happens, and Ellen alluded to this, if you do this, they become like mini trials, basically. Everyone's got a lawyer up, you gotta get your evidence in. So it elongates the district commission part of the procedure, makes it really formal, and one of the things that most people think work well, but actually is pretty informal. You can come in and resolve issues. Most things don't get appealed, as you know. There are somewhere between like 5 and 10 appeals a year. And a lot of appeals are avoided because it's informal, because you don't have to lawyer up and, get in your corner, so to speak. And this would really shift that. I also think there is an equity issue around the district commissions are volunteers. So you basically have to think about, there's 3 district commissioners, you're paying $50 a day per diems for them. They're just for the meetings and not for the work they do. Then you'd be asking them to work as basically 12 like mini judges. So I think that's a shift that, those are just some of the things that come out.
No, that's helpful.
So you would not be in favor of this change? I just want to
No,
be clear.
VNRC doesn't support it. I don't know, you have to hear from other people, but I think there's concerns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are valid. I
You
think
have
those
to-
are valid.
For a person, you'd have to afford an attorney, which can pretty much, inhibit you from being able to appeal something that is egregious.
Right. I'd like to hear more, and I don't even think this one is an ask from one side or the other. There are, again, plenty of folks who'd rather not have something on the record so they can, have a fresh hearing at a higher level. But it would just be nice to hear more about this.
Yeah, no, you should
Also
hear
for
it.
transparency's sake. I think the informality sometimes becomes kind of who are these people making the decision and what is happening?
So I think just to complement what Keisha said, I think what our concern here is transparency, and maybe there's some in between that we can figure out, because I think you're right. I think that there's, we are relying on volunteers basically on all our district commissions. We don't want to overburden them. We need them. It's hard enough to find them, quite honestly, and because they can be fairly contentious. And I think it would be great to find a balance between a little more transparency, a little more formality in that also precious informality in which lots gets resolved.
Because one change the legislature did make over the last few years to the transparency required that if you want to appeal a permit, you have to raise the issue, like you can't raise new issues. And that has certainly had a positive effect of saying you got to come in and at least state your concern on the record.
Right.
And you can't raise new concerns like once you get to appeals, so you're limited. The appeals are like a really almost never of the whole permit. It's like it's a specific argument, and then you're limited to. So that's one you may want to look at that law. Because I think that has helped. So those types of things I think have helped.
Senator Harrison.
Just a quick question, please. Just to address the just knowledge of the folks in the area that an Act 250 permit is under review. I've just wondered why we don't require a sign at the site to say that it's under Act 250 review. Because I think it's a project can be of general impact, not just of the immediate.
Like the zoning, like you have the zoning.
But just a relatively,
that is a good
sign
idea.
that you can see, and then people will know, and then it'll be more transparent.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
All right, do we need to put that in legislation, or can?
I have to look at this.
Somebody would have to pay for that, so yeah, probably.
Okay.
I mean, I think if we read the language, I think there are provisions here that, in my mind, are more about transparency. At the applicant's expense, this would be video recorded. I just think we did tackle some of these things that.
So this impacts the open meeting law bill that we're working on in Senate GovOps, because this is a public meeting, right? These are open meetings.
Yes.
Are at the, anyway, so I just give us a heads up that there's an intersection here with our open meeting law and the on the record piece, and what we may be requiring.
I'm remembering, just the NRB, there was a pilot project done on record review a couple of different times.
Yeah.
And applicants chose not to do it. So you should talk about the NRB, because they have some data about that as well.
Okay.
And we don't want to make it so formal that it costs everybody more at this stage.
Right.
That's important.
We'd like to take care of the simple issues at the earliest stage and have only the larger, more complex.
Right. Yeah.
And also the atmosphere to encourage agreement or getting to yes, without it being promoting adversarial. I've come up with the right word for that.
If we do that, if the parties at the district commission work out an agreement and somebody else in the public doesn't like that agreement, can they appeal it?
They would have to be parties, and they'd have to state the concerns at that time.
Okay, so they'd have to be in
the
the original thing.
You couldn't do it, right?
I couldn't just come and say,
No.
oh, well, I don't like that you let them do
You
that.
have to be there at the initial proceeding.
Okay, that limits it.
Is this, Senator Harrison, something you want to keep exploring, like?
The on the record, or?
Yeah.
On the record is
whether
a
we
very
include
big
this.
issue. Is this from my comments? Is this here from my comments?
No, it's here because I've always heard that it's worth
Okay.
exploring, but we can end our exploration of it. You could keep, I just don't think there's any more work for Ellen to do. What I'm asking is, we'll have some people come in and testify. Did you want to keep looking at the language around transparency pieces and continue to add?
Well, I want to add the sign I want to
The
add
sign.
a sign requirement, that's.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's,
Oh, I mean, I can draft that language and send it to you.
It's okay, so you're sending the
Yeah.
sign
because
requirement,
I
okay.
think if the district commission is more informal, then you don't have a formal record, and when you go up, you need to have a formal record, but you should only have to do that once. You know, appeals after that should go on the record.
So,
You should only have to hire, get all your designers and everything and get them and pay them one time.
so you're saying that first appeal is de novo?
Yeah, the District 5
Mm-hmm.
should, that's just the first appeal. The
Yeah,
second one should be
Right.
de novo, and then anything after that goes
That's
on.
how
that's how it
That's
functions,
how it works.
okay, yeah,
So
Well,
that-
Supreme Court is on the record.
yeah, right.
It seems to me, as we're looking at this whole issue of on the record, part of what we're trying to do is to say, what can we do to speed up the process and to make it less duplicative than it is right now?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things is we really need to do at least some kind of fundamental, before we say this may be a good idea, fundamental cost analysis of, is this in fact going to speed anything else? Or are we going to have a situation in which every applicant has to get legal assistance and so on and so forth to be able to prepare for this, and it actually becomes, that is a cost that comes into play and that has to be borne by many applicants that do not now necessarily have it now. Is it going to speed things up? Because you don't have to go de novo in the event of an appeal? Or have you added to the time to do everything?
Right.
Because one of the things that we do when we look at cost about Act 250 in general,
Mm-hmm.
is we say the costs that are actually incurred in the process, but we don't count the costs that are incurred in preparing for the process. And that ought to be taken into account. And I just question
yeah.
how much analysis
Yeah.
we have done to say that this is really a good idea without being able to put some numbers.
And I think John makes a good point that that not being able to bring up new issues later on was kind of a big piece of the intent of this. If people can look at page 6, subsection E, in my mind, that's a big question in terms of transparency. Do we want these as a standard matter recorded and made available by request?
I know who requests them all.
Huh?
I know who requests them all.
Right.
Your guy,
But who
Marcus,
would have to pay for it?
Randy knows.
Oh,
I
yeah.
shouldn't invoke his name. That is an expense for the applicant, but I think the question is there a policy reason in terms of transparency that we'd want to have all of these video recorded?
But
Aren't they audio recorded now?
Yeah.
Aren't they audio recorded?
Well, open meeting law does
Yeah,
not.
recorded.
Yeah, so
Yeah, I mean, it
audio,
used to be.
if the person identifies themselves, I think it's fine, and it actually lends itself more to a, casual, neighbor to neighbor kind of conversation.
I think the tapes are traditionally mostly for the district coordinator, so they could go back when
Oh,
they
really?
listen, yeah.
Yeah.
The tapes are hard to listen at, they're not, maybe they're better quality.
Oh, so maybe
Yeah.
it's
Well,
not.
so now
it's
in the
not-
era of Zoom,
Yeah, maybe they're better quality, You guys are all taped too, right? I've done that.
we are.
And broadcast
Now you're on
live
YouTube.
forever.
Right.
Some
now
of
we're
us
everywhere.
forget
We
that.
are in the ether forever.
So again, the open meeting law may be, because these are quasi judicial and involve money, these may be in the future required to be hybrid meetings and therefore recorded possibly in a more effective way, i.e.
So
however they're doing the hybrid meeting.
Yeah, if you could do hybrid, you wouldn't have to pay your engineer
Exactly.
to come up from New York City or your architect if they could be zoomed in.
And that's what
And that would help.
so this is fine. We have an intersection here with the open meeting law update.
do you think the open meeting law update will take care of this?
I think we should probably discuss it and
Okay.
figure it out, because
Okay.
again, we're trying to get rid of duplication in all
Right.
places. Let's try and be consistent in all the things we're looking at.
So are we asking Ellen to strike most of the language related to de novo versus on the record right now? Put in the signage piece and keep the piece about video recording?
I don't know enough to have an opinion on this.
So you want to keep it in and keep just bringing-
Without saying that I want to pass it.
Right, okay,
I think
I
it's
just didn't-
worthy
yeah,
of
I mean,
conversation.
I didn't know if
Yeah,
people
I
wanted
mean,
to continue the conversation.
You can have defendants in court on video now. It mostly to save us money from having to transport them from St. Albans to Bennington for
Right.
court. But we do allow some, video in the court process, and that's probably more rigid than this. But there would be an expense to get the equipment.
Right.
Um,
So I would say my understanding is that the House is not looking at this issue as part of their appeals, package. So if people want to have more testimony on this, we can. As we get into appeals language, there is a suggestion on the table from the vice chair that we let most of these appeals issues be discussed in the House first and wait to see what they come up with, so we're not having competing conversations without realizing it.
Right, and not wasting our time.
But this
Yeah,
issue.
I don't want to waste our time because we have a lot more to cover in this bill.
So maybe could we go over the whole bill first and then decide if we're gonna, if something isn't obvious to delete?
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep track of changes we're
Okay.
asking for because I don't want to make Ellen do that by herself.
Of
So
course, okay.
we want to sign.
And also, we could maybe bring, Ellen and I could bring in Tucker on some of this too, to
Right.
talk about how we might sync it up with what we're doing over there, no?
Sure.
Oh, I thought that was like a no.
Ah, great. Tucker's an expert on that.
Well,
Anything that she doesn't have to write.
Oh my God, we ever do our survey? Okay.
we did
Okay.
do it,
So let-
and I have my checks and she has mine. We've done it, no one's asked us for it.
Oh, good. Okay.
Okay.
We're good on de novo versus on the record. We're gonna keep discussing it.
Okay, so starting with section 8, now most of these sections are what came out of H719, and I will point that out. So section 8, still in Act 250, we're in the definition of development, which is one of the jurisdictional triggers for Act 250. So on page 7, section 8, 6001, development means each of the following: the construction of housing projects such as cooperatives, condominiums, or dwellings, or construction or maintenance of mobile homes or mobile home parks with 30 or more units, constructed or maintained on a tract or tracts of land not located within a designated center, but in a municipality that may be feasibly served by water and sewer infrastructure, and then owned or controlled by a person within any continuous period of 2 years. So currently under the statute, you may remember from last year's discussion, construction of 10 or more units of housing triggers Act 250 jurisdiction. Under last year's bill, you did temporarily change that to 25 or more units.
Right.
This is a slightly different change. It's raising it to 30 or more units require a permit if they're not located in a designated center, but in a municipality that may be feasibly served by water and sewer infrastructure.
I'm not sure about that part. I'm just gonna flag that.
Well, I think it's,
Yeah.
I'm feasibly served. We've got Satan's pasture in Montpelier. They want a TIF to put water and sewer up there. The water and sewer run down Barry Street, but not up into that. I also have an issue with the state of Vermont did not allow Montpelier to size their water filtration plant to anything beyond their normal growth, which was almost nothing. We cannot supply Berlin, and we take the water from Berlin. So there are some things that have been put in place that will artificially limit growth. Because if you weren't a growth area, it gets to be as ridiculous as the town of Berlin had to put in an entirely different water system,
Right.
because of the growth restrictions based on history. And somebody spent a lot of water for a second plant, which could have just run some pipes up to the hospital and been fine.
So, gosh, that seems ridiculous.
I thought so at the time, but
So we might feel maybe feasibly served is a little too fuzzy.
it is, I'm trying to understand, if feasibly served means the pipe runs down Barry Street, then it's feasible that the pipes could go up.
Yeah.
So
Up
the
there,
feasibly is actually modifying municipality. So we're not talking about the development specifically. This is a way to sort of draw boundaries around where this limit is.
Yes.
So this is somewhat related to the Natural Resources Board report, but
Yes.
not entirely.
Is this like a tier 2?
No.
How about we
this
go
is
back-
kind of like tier 1B.
1B, okay.
What's, sorry.
What's the intent of this language?
Oh,
What's the
that I can't
goal?
tell you, but
The commissioner
yeah,
might
we
be able
did
to.
it. Let's let the commissioner
Okay.
speak to that. Yeah.
And I think there is maybe some tweaking of language that could better. And so it's,
Identify yourself for the record.
Right.
oh, that's right. For the record, Alex Farrell, Commissioner, Department of Housing and Community Development. The intent of the language was to capture areas within a municipality that, and I'm thinking tracts of land that can be served by municipal water and wastewater systems. So not to point to an entire municipality that has the municipal water and wastewater, but areas within. So I think what Senator Clarkson described, a parcel tract that runs along municipal water and wastewater. would be
David's
considered.
pasture.
But
Yeah.
this is lifting the Act 250 threshold. So it's the infamous 1055 to something else.
30.
But,
Right,
To
but just before we,
32, and not a 2-2, but just
Okay.
a 2. So there's no 2-mile requirement.
The boundary would instead be the tract or tracts of land, as I read it, served.
so, and we talked about one of your places that where water and sewer ran up a road. Again, it goes also to your transportation corridor.
Oh,
Yeah.
that was in Barrytown.
Yeah,
last year,
that where we could have
it
done
ran
housing,
out, and that was okay.
but we,
What I'm thinking is water and sewer, if you had to put in a new filtration plant, the state limited size. I don't know how many they did, but I know they did it here. We did put the pipes under, we can't put a new tank in, but it's limited. But this brings up that can be served by city water and sewer. It got brought up yesterday. The towns used to pay to do the water and sewer.
Right.
Now the developers pay. That Montpelier wanted a chip to get the water and sewer into Sabin's pasture. It runs at the bottom and the top, but getting it through. And we're gonna have to deal, we keep getting mini chips, and I'm just, right now, I can't put any more money out of the ed fund. But the issue of municipal ability, cost-wise, to do that, and if the developer does it, it just adds significantly to the cost of the construction, and therefore you get McMansions rather than little slab ranches. And we're gonna have to find a solution to the water and sewer, the infrastructure.
okay, just a couple things. I
Yeah.
think this area needs to be identified before you start looking at it for development. I think it would be a very bad policy to be arguing about if it's feasible for water and sewer at the time you're doing a development. Because again, we want the process to be predictable, and that's not predictable. So I think something that I hope is happening, and I've talked to people at A&R about this, is to have, the municipality should have an ultimate service area for its water and for its sewer. The municipality should establish that with A&R so that it's on a map.
which
So
will be
everybody
part of the mapping.
understands.
Yeah.
And so that feasibly served is just too
It's vague.
gushy for
Yeah.
this. I mean, I appreciate knowing the intent. And so I think, if you have an ultimate service area, that would be what you want. That's not saying that the municipality would necessarily pay for it. You might want the developer to pay for it. You might want it to be a combination. You might want the state to pay for it, depending on what it is. But those are things to figure out once you're looking at it.
Once your mapping's done.
Right,
Well,
right. But
I mean, I hate to say it, but that is part of why how these all kind of work together.
Yeah,
because then
yeah.
you could just green light that project.
we had a,
or
If it-
on that category, there's still all these other things. So that's the water and sewer part, but then this brings up the 2 years. I really want to have a real conversation about that, because I still don't understand why it matters who's doing it.
Right.
That,
Or the.
I
Yeah.
just have,
I mean,
so you're probably the first to ask about that, but I can
well,
talk offline.
let's
too.
pause on, we might wanna all take testimony on that and have that discussion. We might wanna do it with language that we feel better about.
Sure.
To match the intent of what I think we're talking about, which in big principle is that not all Act 250 exemptions, can fall into designated areas necessarily if we're gonna have rural economic development. And that's why I wanna talk to Charlie Hancock and others who pointed out to us, hey, this person used the 1055 to create like the ugliest thing in our town. That's very poorly constructed. So we want, more density, but also more sort of control over what's meaningful to stop sprawl.
And quality,
Yes, right. So,
quality in the right place.
Yeah.
I would talk to the RPCs and
Yeah,
ask them how the mapping that they're gonna do overlays with this.
Yes, because I think that's the key question.
Because the intent is that mapping would do what you guys are talking about.
Exactly, it would
Right.
clarify, and so you
Right.
could just green light
Ask Catherine
every.
Dimitrick, ask, Charlie Baker.
at the same time, I think, we, with every proposal we look at about increasing or lifting thresholds, we have to decide if there's an interim step we're creating for the next 2 years, because saying nothing changes, are we keeping in place the exemptions we already put in place for the last year? So we still need to have a policy conversation about the interim policy and then, what the final policy.
But I think the interim can be at the end of this process, because we'll know what we're doing.
Okay,
That's fair. I just want us to keep in mind
Totally
that
agree.
we can't say everything's gonna be taken care of in
Yeah.
mapping
Yeah,
because we have a housing crisis.
okay.
totally agree.
yeah,
Madam Chair, may I further clarify
Yeah.
the intent?
Yes.
The thinking with this language is also to try to tie it to, in section 20, where we talk about multi-units up to 4 units on water.
Yes.
It's, the intent is to tie to that, so that would be the same. And so I think that's
Okay.
also contemplated in the Home Act, as I recall.
But
So whatever language change needs to happen, I think it just needs to match up with.
So I think that what I'm hearing is that we need to have a conversation. I mean, this to me is very much a mapping, why we're tying the mapping work from the RPCs into our new tier system that the NRB report is recommending. I do think we need to identify sections of this bill which we are willing to think about as an interim until the
Yes.
mapping's done. So I think,
And can I jump in?
yeah.
So I do want to just say, I think, please correct me. So this was drafted, I think, before the NRB
Right.
report was finished. I think it relates to the NRB report in that it
Yes.
slightly conflicts with what I have
Yes.
drafted later, but I
Yes,
think
it
they
does.
are, we can
We
look
can
at.
harmonize.
It's
Yes.
a menu.
It is a choice based on what that
Mhm.
process was bringing to light.
Right.
So if this is what was in 719,
Mm-hmm.
you asked me to try to put together some language for the NRB report, which
Yeah.
is rough, in case anyone is
Yeah.
listening, it is not good,
Right.
but it is not good. But this is I think an option
Yes.
related to that, and we are in this bill gonna talk about more options.
Yes.
So I think if we don't need to resolve this at the moment, because there's more language that's gonna come
We
up
understand the
related to that.
intent and where we might place this policy.
Exactly, so I think,
Senator Cummings.
in the mapping,
Clarify.
are the
Yeah.
local communities going to have to buy in?
they begin it. It's all begun, the local community up, right, John? This is designed, the whole mapping is designed to be.
That's the intent.
They have to buy in, but we might wanna put teeth in the RPC's role
And that was my question about the carrots. We
Right.
need carrots to get them to do it
No,
and do it
just to
on
be
time.
clear, I mean, the towns are, you know, the RPCs are required to get their input, but the RPCs make the final decision.
Okay, I don't,
Yeah.
is that drafted that way? I thought it was drafted as like a
Yeah.
system.
The town doesn't
No.
they have to get
Okay.
have input, but the RPCs will make the decision. The towns may not agree with every.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
And
yeah.
if we're gonna get more resistance, we're pushing a lot of density. But I think, as we saw in the color of law, that at a point, density becomes a problem, that it breeds unhealthy social situations. So you need that balance. And if you tell towns that they've got to put up quadruplexes and that they don't feel is in the character of their town, I mean, John, how would you think putting a quadruplex in Maple Corners would go? I mean,
If it's a big old house and you actually end up.
no, that you could
You
convert,
can
but
do.
if you're talking about building a big square box on the lake, that's gonna, you know, you're gonna say, if you zone this for housing, and yesterday we were talking about manufactured homes, mobile homes by right, you're gonna get more pushback, because Gus is right, human beings are afraid of change, and we tend to react very cautiously or resistant. And the more change you ask people to make in their sense of, you know, what works for Montpelier is not gonna work for some of these other towns. If you've got big brick buildings, you can take more big brick buildings. But towns that just have little single-family homes, I think we just need to be cautious as to, in wanting to deal with everything, we may frighten people so much that they're gonna push back.
You are always our voice of caution. I
I
don't think we're gonna
experience. I like
limit
to
that
think
conversation. I think we should walk through the bill and look at it in totality, but this is a good area to be asking what our rural constituents would like to see. You know, they still need more housing near their hospitals. They still need functional economies that have enough housing for workers. And I think this is the broad principle here is that not all of our exemptions can just take place in population centers in such a rural.
Right, and I think we appreciate that, but I think this is an interim measure
Right.
at the moment. I think my hope is that the mapping is, that the RPCs bring along every town in the town's green light, the final work, because you're right, and that's why we need really to be thoughtful about our incentives.
Yes, I think we need to get the
Absolutely.
towns to agree. If they think
Right,
what they're going to agree to is they have to start putting up quadruplexes,
right.
and
I
that's
have
the
to
image
say,
that goes there.
we're dealing with municipalities that are saying, this is our character, this is the way it's always
Right.
been, and they are buying quadruplexes and turning them into single-family homes and duplexes.
Yeah,
And so creating this sense that we're trying to protect the way it's always been is incredibly subjective. And,
Right.
you know, people have really, in many contexts, gotten used to a boarding house, a quadruplex, you know, that doesn't
Yeah.
that doesn't change an envelope.
No.
It doesn't add a big box apartment building, but it's
but I
it
think that's
has
what you
four
need
people
you
living in
need
it.
to help people understand that if, because it won't be too difficult to stir the community up. And I say that from years of planning. I really wish Alan Goldman had been able to put up his condos up on the ridge up here in the hill.
Mm-hmm.
But there was actually a neighborhood newspaper developed in opposing that thing based on traffic, of what the traffic would be 23 years from now, on the thing of my toddler, who's now playing on that little dead-end strip,
Mm-hmm.
would get run down 20 years from now when he's 23, and he probably shouldn't play in the road. There's a lot of resistance.
Right.
And
We're gonna have to decide when we're saying, blame us in Montpelier, because it's gonna take way too much courage at the local level when your neighbor's screaming in your face. but we have to create a cohesive statewide policy that's consistent. And I'm, we just have to decide the line where people will live with changes but blame us, versus some kind of all-out revolt.
Well, maybe we have built up areas now and we have smaller rural towns. Maybe what is required there, if I want to do a 3-house development in a small town, but the state says I have to allow quadruplexes and duplexes, that I think gives it, maybe you can style them, but is that as appropriate in Riverton as it is in Montpelier or Barry? And I think make it sound like they're not going to have any choice. We'll just make it harder to get this through.
I think that we need to help towns in this whole mapping process, and the RPC will do this, is build on the plans they already have invested in. So every town has a plan. So I think that it's called reviewing that plan and recommitting to that plan.
You know where
And that,
Montpelier's growth is? It's out at Agway. That's the growth area. It's all industrial.
So
it's,
this will be, Ellen's time is precious.
and we go to the floor in 20 minutes.
And we go, our time is precious. This is not a conversation I ever want to stifle, and in fact, many of our communities, the market is asking for little cottages where there's an HOA, but you still have your own 4 walls. They're also limited from doing that. This density doesn't mean,
No, but I think some requirements might be appropriate in larger communities, and the requirement, if they want to do it, they can, but the requirement might be very threatening to much smaller communities.
Right, and we need to have it not be threatening. We need to have, this is an opportunity for them to reinvest and reaffirm and do some changing and revisiting of their town plans. And then that is, I think, the basis and foundation for the work the RPCs is going to be doing with them.
Well, would you say allowance versus Band-Aid is obviously much more palatable?
Yeah.
And much more in keeping with what we do and have done as a state traditionally.
Well, the Home Act has allowed by right,
Yep.
up to 4 units on municipal water and sewer. So,
And
Well, that's
that's
also because the
law
small
now.
towns don't have water and sewer.
right, so a lot of this.
Chips to put in a municipal septic tank.
A lot of this is limited by that factor. And that's, even if it's an elegantly written, that's still a tool that even Charlotte, will have forever and ever. So, ultimately, we are talking about where we've invested in the public infrastructure and the public good, and saying you can't.
Very limited.
Yeah, it's very limited. It's very expensive.
Okay.
Just a super quick
Yes.
thing. Ellen, I really appreciate when you say what sections are in 719. If you could please keep doing that.
I think it's the rest of this bill for a while. So,
Okay.
until we get
to the recommendations from the NRB piece.
Yeah.
All right, we'll just, as we go along, I appreciate that.
There's only a couple that are, I'll pull them out.
Thank you.
But just to put a pin in, you'd like to hear the argument for 1055 at some point. You want to have a discussion.
Yes, and the theory behind it, because I think we might be able to accomplish the goals if they are worthy goals in other ways.
I think this will be a continued point of discussion, but if anybody has witnesses that they want to hear.
But as we progress, I want to make sure we keep tagging things that could be exemptions for the interim period, and what we want to leave to green light for the final mapping work that we will adopt hopefully in the session 26.
Okay.
Yes.
We strongly support voluntary mandates.
Oh, you.
My police chief used to say, selective enforcement to encourage voluntary compliance. That was speed traps.
Oh, that's funny.
So page 8 and 9, we're still in this section. It deletes the definition, part of the definition of priority housing project. And the reason that's being deleted is because on the next page, we will get to in a moment, what this is leading to is that an exemption for designated areas.
Mm-hmm.
So currently the I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this, but priority housing projects currently only exist in designated areas. So if the whole area is exempt from Act 250, you don't need priority housing projects as a concept. So that's why they're being struck. On page 9, there's some more related language on this topic. The construction of housing projects such as cooperative condominiums, dwellings, or mobile homes with 10 or more units constructed or maintained on a tract or tract of land owned or controlled by a person within 5 miles within 2 years. So this is, I guess, somewhat akin to tier 2 probably, which is, it's keeping the 10, but it's 10, 5, 2. So
where is the thing that happens?
On page 9.
No, I know, but like, wait, how does it differentiate from the other one? Where's the language that?
Because what differentiates?
This would be everywhere else, so.
Yeah,
Everywhere else.
So
Okay,
that's what
okay.
so on the prior section that we were just talking about with 30 units,
Yeah,
it's the feasibly connected to sewer water is the
Okay.
sort of differentiation, right?
I see.
This is everywhere else. And on the next page, we'll get to the part where it says designated areas are fully exempt.
So this does not need to be on water and sewer?
Correct.
What existed before here? 1055?
Yeah.
So this is 1055 to 1052. It
Yeah.
reduces the number of years.
But doesn't reduce pocket sprawl necessarily, right?
It's no change except for years.
So only, okay, so this counts as development and gets you into Act 250.
Yes. Yep, we're still in Act 250 jurisdictional triggers.
Thank you,
And that, yes, is from 719.
thank you.
So, also on page 9, the next section, so starting on line 19, this is, I don't think this is in 719.
Right.
This is the request to make permanent one of the provisions you passed last year. So this is construction of 25 or more units.
Sorry, this is the bottom of page 9.
This is the bottom of page 9, starting on line 13. This is the provision you passed last year in the Home Act. It's getting rid of the sunset, so it's making it permanent. So 25 or more units triggers Act 250 if they've been constructed in a downtown neighborhood development area or village center with permanent zoning. So this is not in 719, because I did just want to, and I did want to point out, this does conflict.
Yep. I asked for repealing the sunsets that we put in place last year, so it was gonna conflict anyway in
Right.
a sense, but we needed to sort out what we did.
So
But it
this-
gets rid of my other bill, so that's, but anyway.
So because then on the next page is exempting
The entire area.
the entire area.
Right.
So this is, again, you have options here within this bill
Mhm.
that you'll need to
Yes.
reconcile
Yes.
if you're going to pass it, but you do have choices. On page 10, development does not include any housing projects within a designated center and within a radius of 1/2 mile of the boundary of the designated center, and that is from 719.
So this is and this is also a provisional measure, basically, until we have the tiers and until we have the mapping work
It
done.
can be.
This could be an interim measure that extends, basically takes a neighborhood, creates a neighborhood area, development area, wraps it around what might be a very tiny village
Right.
center.
Yeah.
So in Woodstock, we have a very tiny designated village center. This conceivably on an interim measure could greenlight projects that are appropriately close to the center of that downtown.
Yeah.
Is that my understanding of this?
I'm not characterizing it that way,
Right.
but you can.
Madam Chair, may I,
Right, for the record.
comment? So, for the record, Alex Farrell, just, this could be, you could tweak this, but I would characterize it similarly to what you said. You could do a couple things. I mean, the idea here is let's provide some area on the outside of Village and downtown, so theoretically folks can get outside of the floodplain, but it's still in close to that dense area. Now, this We came to this half mile around just to sort of capture a broader swath, because a couple folks in the planning space thought that's an option. Though you may still want to consider carve outs for things like wetlands and floodplain.
Yes, obviously, it has to be appropriate building space.
But they would, the exemption of Rec 250 still means they have to get a wetland permit and the other permits.
That's right, exactly. So it might be redundant. I'll also say a half mile is one way to approach this. Another option would be the designated area plus the planning buffer. The planning buffer is defined as half mile around designated downtowns, a quarter mile around village centers, and a quarter mile around town centers.
So that already exists in statute of planning buffer?
Well, it's defined, I don't know where the definition exists, but so instead of half mile around all of.
Yeah, no, which is kind of a brutal, I mean, it's kind of an arbitrary thing.
We might spell that out because I don't want to inadvertently create some new designation.
But if this exists in statute of planning buffer,
I don't know what it does.
I haven't heard that word yet.
So we might just spell out, this kind of designated center has this radius, this kind of designated.
But getting back to the gentleman you had in that wanted to put what houses, I know exactly the one.
Yeah,
the
right,
house
on Route
next
2.
door.
Yeah.
It's more than a quarter mile
Right.
from downtown.
Right.
But there's a huge cliff that would, and a river that would prevent housing. On the other hand, there are other areas of town. So if you just draw a half mile circle, it's not allowing for topography because a lot of our topography limits, and you might have to go down here. And this place out past the cemetery is a little village. It's got a creamy stand and it's got affordable housing. And it, I believe, does have a wetlands in the back he'll have to deal with. But it was an old apple orchard, which hasn't been done. It was a veterinarian's field. It would be a good place. It is, you know, it's within that little village area, which probably starts a half mile from downtown. So, but you'd have to be able to trade it off.
Right.
I think we could come up with flexible
It'd be
language.
logical.
Yeah,
for
I mean,
that.
I-
I'm not too
right.
worried about that.
Well, I think what we decide, without using a circular geographic boundary, which I think is what Senator Thompson is saying, there are communities that would like us to look at, you know, giving them interim power to determine, you know, period, like the New North End of Burlington or like town. So if we, I think maybe we set a threshold that's, you know, they have some level of zoning that kind of already has designated where growth can happen. And it's still interim because we want to make sure they don't create inequities in their final map. But on an interim basis, you know, a community could just, Montpelier, which has said to this guy, we have no problem with this, could say, this is fine, you know, and we're Montpelier, we have a
That's up
professionalized.
to the interstate. It's not blocking anyone's view.
And they have to get other permits
Yeah.
in A&R.
Oh, yeah, no, they'll have to get water.
And we might want to make a distinction between redevelopment and development, because if a site's already been developed, then it, you know, it
Yes.
can be developed better.
Mm-hmm.
I think that puts it in a
That's
better
interesting.
category. So that might just be
Yeah.
one, that might be one of the things
Existing.
that we look at.
I still wanted to put did I ask for our commercial conversion language from last year? Okay, so that's in two, so if they're taking a commercial property
Right.
and converting it.
And residential into commercial, that we heard about yesterday is a
I thought we heard
great
about commercial.
No,
idea.
it was commercial to residential.
But
SRO.
Yeah.
no, but requiring residential to be,
To have commercial available.
no, to requiring residential in commercial areas.
Right.
Yeah, that's what we,
commercial.
yeah, that's what, maybe I'm saying it
We hear
backwards.
backwards. Yeah.
But it's
Right.
great, and I hope it will be here or not, just, but we just heard about it yesterday.
Okay. So we have work we want to do to change. So I guess the question on the table is, do we delete the section before that conflicts, which means we're actually striking our own language from last year in favor of a different exemption with a different thresholds that lets communities do interim development without Act 250.
Can I frame that slightly differently?
Sure.
I did draft this vague, weird language about the NRB report, so I
Okay.
think where you're going is
Yeah.
something like the NRB report.
Yes.
But You
but
want
an
to,
interim piece for communities that already have some pretty high
Designations.
level of. I just think they want to be able to look outside of their designated areas for Act 250 exemption to build to meet the needs of the crisis, right?
And until the mapping work is finished.
Right.
okay, then I'll just stop there, because I was,
What were you gonna say?
I think what you need to
I'm getting
make a few different choices on this topic, which is, are you identifying areas for exemptions? What are those areas? How many units are you talking about? And then I guess, is it interim or is it just, I was thinking in the context of setting up this
Yeah.
tier structure, I guess that is true also, but
So,
there are multiple proposals in this bill with different numbers of housing units that are
Mhm.
exempt based on where they're located, and they conflict, so you will have to
Right.
choose what, and you don't have to pick any of them
Mhm.
right now, but
Yeah.
you,
That's kind of what I'm
Yes,
summarizing, is this section has no numeric limit. It uses a geographic area within and around the designated areas. We could stop there and just say that's an interim exemption. We already have these designated areas. But we have requests from communities that have very sophisticated planning to give them more opportunity that's not geographically bound to these circles around their downtown, because they are trying to meet the homelessness crisis that, you know, they are actually trying to build. And these are also areas where there's flooding occurring, so they want to get outside of these specific rings.
I thought we would go through the whole thing before we make decisions
Yeah.
on canceling language.
Well, we're not, yes,
I thought I thought you were saying get rid of this.
No, not
No.
this, the piece before conflicts.
it does. So
But
may I
can we-
also make a
yeah,
suggestion?
Go through the whole.
I think, we need to go through the whole thing, which we're not gonna have time because we're on the floor in 7 minutes.
I never expected this.
No, but I actually also hear Ellen saying, by our asking to put the NRB update recommendations into this bill, in some ways, it makes some sense to start there. And I think I'm hearing you maybe say that.
I am not saying that because
Okay.
I have not been able to draft it.
Right.
So it is not a concrete proposal that you can work from unless you give me very
But-
specific direction.
Then let me just talk big
Glad
picture,
I'm not
because it
the
strikes me that if we,
John, can we get somebody on that? I mean, Ellen just hasn't heard back from Peter.
I mean, we are working on it. I talked with Ellen this morning.
We're all working on it. Okay.
We need to
For
get done.
environment and energy.
Yeah, there are the 3 different committees that,
Right.
that needed and wanted. And quite frankly, what happened was that the NRB finished its work, I think, Christmas.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so like,
Right.
and then we came back after the holiday and it's like, and there was no request to get draft language and that.
I think I asked for like a placeholder in the
But we
fall,
need it,
like
though.
there
We
was,
need
there
the
was just a
language, yeah.
placeholder until.
Yeah, no, I
January.
agree with
So-
everything the senator talked, we need the language.
Yeah.
so
look
we need the,
to
right,
have a job.
let me just finish my thought, my thought is that we really start there and then do some interim exceptions.
Mhm.
And because I feel very strongly that we need to do the mapping, we need to do the designations, and we need to do the recommendations of the NRB report. There, however, need to be, to address the crisis we face right now, we need some exemptions for the interim period while we're waiting for the mapping work to be done. That once, and so I would, in some ways, before we go through all these pieces, these are, in some ways, a lot of these are exemptions that we're gonna ask for the interim.
Right, so okay, so then we
So-
won't try to cut anything out right now, but.
So I'd start
Just
with
a
the
lot of
NRB
things that we're like-
recommendations and figure out what we
Yeah.
want to exempt
Then
for
we're
the interim.
No, I'm just saying, we're trying to build on what is probably a flawed foundation.
Yes.
When we heard last year from Josh Hannaford that village centers were not set up
Yeah.
for expansion or housing, you
Exactly.
didn't identify. And so we've
Which is
got
why we
this
have
little,
BNBAs.
little tight core that's got a church and a school and a library in it. And we're drawing a 1/4 mile circle around that. And
But that's what
Yeah.
water and sewer is.
Mhm.
well, water, but most of our towns don't have very good
Yeah.
sewer.
But
We,
lots of do.
they
so.
couldn't build a senior housing thing in East Montpelier because they couldn't get septic on a very nice piece of land. And they don't have public water. There's a private water company out there. And that's a big town.
Right.
So
It is.
Yes, Edmonton town to Montpelier, it's not up in the kingdom.
Right, its core isn't very big, is it?
What?
Is there?
Oh, the core,
the
no,
core
it's a
you
general
drive through
store and a
isn't very
post
big.
office.
Yeah.
But it's a big town.
So, yeah, so I mean, I hear what Senator Cummings is saying. This is probably where we'll end for today. And I don't want to scare anybody. We won't delete anything. We're just gonna have to stay aware of a lot of these conflicts and not sort of leave it in Ellen's brain and be thinking about which path we'd like to take. I will tell you from what I know, and someone can correct me, but I have heard that Environment and Energy is looking at a similar broad principle that there would be interim exemptions and it would terminate when the tiering map is done. That's what I understand. So I think we're staying somewhat aligned from what I
Then
understand.
let's work with that. I think that is the way where we have.
But we'd repeal sunsets, and we'd have to repeal some of that language with the sunsets if we're staying on that path. We don't have to do it right now, but
We
that's.
might even want a separate bill for the interims to be just super clear
Yeah,
than the
that might help.
permanent. Just think about that, Ellen.
Yeah, it's trying to
No.
get it all in one bill, cause I'm getting totally confused as.
Well, and it just might be good for people who are looking at it, for us, I'm just putting that idea out there.
I would recommend our weekend homework is to take a
Read
cruise
this.
through this
Oh, yeah.
huge thing.
And with the beautiful summary that Ellen put together.
It's not a
That's
summary,
why
it's an
it's not a
outline.
Oh, sorry.
It's only an outline of her section.
That's just where you wanna find it.
section of the things that have been requested.
Yeah.
And then
And
we will
that's
get,
been
hopefully by
requested
next week, we may have
everything.
a little more language
You know
that,
what?
that you guys are helping Ellen with.
Yeah, we were gonna go with the hybrid drive on this.
I might
You know.
recommend the NRV plan, strong role.
You know what?
Well, we
Yeah.
want that, but I guess I'm going into the weekend needing to know, Ellen, if you need support, if you need like someone to say this has to be done by Wednesday. And
Well, we have to introduce this bill as a
Right.
bill by Wednesday.
Well, by Friday, we'd be looking at a new draft of this. I would like to go ask the pro temp if we could just keep this bill until February 9th, because I think we'll lose 2 days if we have to bring it to the floor.
We can still work on it all that time. There's nothing stopping us. We
We're
just,
making all these
anyway,
plans,
the
and we
three of us
have
should
to-
have a
Okay.
conversation, because I had that with Phil when Ruth was in.
Yeah.
so
You know, we
were-
know
I
there's
was
some
saying,
Act 250.
We want the same,
Right, but we
We need
haven't heard from
an
them. Is
extension
that the
too.
whole reason? We.
Yeah.
Do you wanna go
Yeah.
inside?
preferring.
Nothing's going to
the method
reason,
of
I
think.
Getting it introduced.
Yeah.
Coming.
Do you wanna, are we